Good morning, everybody. Happy holidays, too. This is the December meeting of the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. Will you please take the roll call with an understanding that Commissioner Revelle will be about a half an hour late.
Commissioner Kern.
Here.
Commissioner Floyd.
Here.
Commissioner Harper.
Here.
Commissioner Molinas.
Here.
Commissioner Pausnick.
Here.
Commissioner Revelle will be late. Chair Rosenbaum.
Here. Okay, we've got a full agenda today, that's for sure. First is a report out from the Oregon Beer and Wine Distributors Association. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. Nice to see all of you.
Dan.
Chair
I'm going to let you
Rosenbaum.
introduce yourself, Danielle and Michael.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Chair Rosenbaum and members of the committee, for the record, my name is Danelle Romaine, and this is Mike Fries, my business partner. We are the executive director, lobbyist, and legal counsel for the Oregon Beer and Wine Distributors Association. And we really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. I don't think we've ever done this, and it's a great opportunity for you to kind of hear what the distributors are doing. We're not consumer-facing, so we don't have a lot of interaction with commissioners, although we have a ton of interaction with your amazing staff. So we're constantly talking to your legal counsel, to Steve, to a lot of people who work here, and we really appreciate all the work that they do. So thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Figure out how to work this.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Fries. Danelle's been representing the Beer and Wine Distributors Association for a long time. I'm relatively new. I think about 2 years. The entire industry, the alcohol industry, is complicated and it's very unique. I have a lot more background in environmental laws and everything, and I always thought that was really complex. But this is truly complicated, and so we do value a lot of OLCC and our partnership and working together on trying to resolve at times really simple issues to others that are more complex or at the legislature. Our membership spans the state. It's from all corners, different sizes of businesses. These mostly are pretty small distributors that service really unique communities. So you have the coast versus Ontario and Eastern Oregon and Portland. And so they market and they distribute products differently. And it's been a really interesting business model to learn about. As an association, I think we showed you, here's our members. We spent a lot of time trying to help our membership work through the regulatory processes that have been put in place that really do help consumers, and they help alcohol manufacturers to get products to market and really serve consumers. And one thing that's been really, I think, helpful perspective is just seeing, going to the grocery store, seeing what's on the shelf, and you can go to other states. And I lived in D.C. for a while, and it's a very different market that you have here, and it's that our members get to serve. One of the important pieces of regulation is making sure that consumers are safe, and so responsible consumption is a big part of what we advocate for. And then, we've done some work trying to understand what the economic impact is in Oregon from our membership, and it's been really interesting to learn more about. So, getting to that, we hired a firm to look across the Northwest to really compare ourselves to see how are we doing, and we were really surprised and happy to find out that we are a growing sector, the distributors, and we have not only added jobs, but we're adding really good paying jobs, and so we pay more than our counterparts in other states. And this really, I think, looking across communities, you can really see in different areas where in Portland we have an impact, and I think sometimes it's more on the consumer side or the manufacturing side, but you can see it in other communities like Pendleton, where there are a lot of jobs there, and these are really, really good jobs in a community that's always looking for more work. And these distributors also do a lot with in community involvement. They sponsor teams, and they have do a lot of philanthropy in their community. So that work has been, I think, really valued in different communities where there's a little more outward-facing in places like Medford, Klamath Falls, Pendleton, where there's not as many businesses in those communities.
Can you go back? What's the national average of industry wages, and why is Oregon, what's the reason Oregon is twice the national average?
I don't know.
I don't think we know that,
Yeah.
but we can get you that information from our national trade associations.
Twice the national average is pretty significant.
And this is the economics
From the
firm
economist.
that and just so you know, there's limited data. There's a lot of the data that exists is proprietary, so we can't see that. We can only see really what's reported back through various government programs, and that information is publicly available. So the economists looked at what information was publicly available and analyzed it based on political boundaries, and this is what we found. Whether or not you dig into that further and you could find that discrepancy is a different question, but on the limited data sets that we have, this is what.
Well, I'm going to be as diplomatic as I can be, but to have answers to those questions are going to be particularly important to you over the next 15 months or so. So, did I do that diplomatically?
Thank you. We will find the answer. Yes.
Sure.
So I think you're all pretty familiar with the three-tier system. This was put together by one of our national trade associations, and you can see the route that alcohol takes. Post 21st Amendment, states were given the authority to create a state-based system of alcohol regulation, which is critical to distributors. We work very well within that system. You can see alcohol goes from the producer, and that's just an example of some alcohol producers, both in-state and out-of-state, to a distributor, and then to the various types of retail establishments. We have a bit on three-tier, and I think we'll just kind of move on to the next slide. We have a very short video that one of our national trade associations has put together on the importance of the three-tier system and really showing how distributors work with the state in three-tier. But this slide really talks about the benefits of three-tier. You can see all of the different benefits, consumer choice. Mike talked about that, all the products that we have on the grocery store shelf. Oregon is very unique in that way. Variety, safety, ensuring that large players don't dominate the market. That's been really critical to the growth of our industry here in Oregon, both wine and beer. We're pretty unique in that way. So if you'll indulge us for a minute, we can figure out how to play this video.
I might.
How do I play it? Okay.
Actually. Sorry. Oh, I was trying to make it bigger.
Hello.
That's wrong.
Or we can watch something else.
After all.
There we go.
Following the repeal of prohibition, states created a three-tier distribution system which strikes a careful balance between control and access of this socially important but potentially harmful product. In this system, brewers sell the beer to distributors, and distributors market, sell, and safely deliver those beers to retailers. Independent beer distributors play a critical role in this three-tier system. In fact, without distributors, the variety and access to beer products that we have come to expect would not exist. Independent distributors are the indispensable buffer between brewers and retailers, preventing dangerous practices while delivering unprecedented consumer choice, variety, and safety. Why does the system work so well, and why is it important for distributors to be independent from the brewer and the retailer? First, Independent distributors insulate retailers from abusive sales practices of absentee brewers. Independent distributors can resist the pressures of big brewers to restrict market access of small brewers. Independence ensures that a distributor is free to distribute any and all products and to ensure all retailers get good service, fair pricing, and wide selections. Second, independent distributors are not headquartered overseas or across the country. They are rooted in cities and towns near all of us, and they have a deep history and connection to their communities, making it more likely that they will sell responsibly and obey local laws. Independent distributors safeguard the opportunity for all brewers and retailers to enjoy free access to the market in the regulated alcohol industry. The current explosion of the craft beer industry in this country is based in large part on the access to market it gets from independent beer distributors, free to handle and help build their brands, and the tremendous financial investment those distributors make. Almost every beer truck you see on the road belongs to an independent distributor. Nearly all the people you see stocking beer shelves and coolers or rolling kegs into a restaurant are employees of independent distributors. As a matter of fact, independent beer distributors directly hire more than 130,000 hard-working men and women. This is more than 3 times the number of people who brew beer for a living. The signs, banners, store displays, coasters, and other marketing materials used to build beer brands are created and provided by independent distributors, who have also built large refrigerated warehouses to store the beer and keep it fresh before delivery.
That's it. So I think hopefully that gave you a sense of the breadth of things that distributors do. I don't think people think very much about how the beer actually gets to the grocery store shelf. And if you think about what goes on in a distributorship, from the refrigerated warehouse to the sales team to the merchandising team to the trucks to the signs, there's a ton of staff and knowledge and education that goes into actually getting a product from the producer to the distributor and actually into the right type of store that will successfully sell that product. So hopefully that gave you a sense of what happens there. Just a little bit we thought we'd touch on. The February short session is coming up. We do have a couple of bills that we'll be introducing on behalf of the Oregon Beer and Wine Distributors Association. One is an issue that we've been working on with the OLCC and Representative Margaret Doherty for quite a while. I think you've heard about this from your government relations staff. It's the issue of kind of closing that loop of how alcohol is getting to consumers. In the modern marketplace, we have a lot of different entities, third-party entities, that are now delivering from retailers to consumers in their homes, in their places of work. And we haven't figured out how to license those entities. So we have a lot of people handling alcohol who are not licensed right now. That is an issue. It needs to be resolved. Other states are figuring out how to tackle this issue. There are different ways to handle that, but it does need to be, we do need to close that loop and ensure that we have licensed deliveries to people in their homes. And I'm hoping we can do that this session. And the other one is a small issue. Requires a statutory change, which is the period of time that a manufacturer or a distributor can lease equipment to a special event. And this deals with what we've been talking about tied house, or not wanting one manufacturer or distributor to have too much control over something like a beer festival. You want multiple entities, multiple brewers to showcase their products at a beer festival. And so there are statutory limitations saying you can only lease that equipment for 10 days. You can't lease it for the whole summer, for example. Our change would allow a 14-day leasing time frame so that it better reflects the timeline of those types of festivals, 2 weeks.
What does the equipment include?
Cold trucks or tap, the trucks basically that are used to tap the kegs at beer festivals, that sort of thing.
No furniture, things like that. None of that is included, right?
You can. I mean, I think it depends on how you define furniture. But I think things that you typically would need to serve beer or wine in an outdoor or at a festival, at a special event.
And so it would increase from what to what?
10 days to 14 days. hopefully it's a nothing deal. I think what it does, though, it showcases why we have certain laws on the books. There's a lot of laws people look at, and especially in the alcohol space, and say, this makes no sense. Why does anyone care about this? Why do we care about 10 days versus 14 days? Why do we regulate the price why do we say that all retailers get alcohol at the same price from the distributor? Why do we care about that? Well, we care about that so there's access to the marketplace for brewers and for producers and distributors of all sizes. And these laws are very important. And Mike and I find ourselves really having to go back and explain from prohibition to the 21st Amendment on about why these laws are in place. And I think we have a great partner in the OLCC to do that. But it does take some education, because when you look at them and you're not familiar with the alcohol space, it doesn't make any sense. So. And the last slide is just what I said earlier. Basically, we really appreciate all of the work that your OLCC staff does in creating manuals to teach distributors and producers and retailers about the different financial assistance laws and marketplace restrictions that help create this fair marketplace. Those are very important. We do call staff often on various things happening in the marketplace to in a friendly way to tell people to knock it off, frankly, to keep the marketplace fair. We do that to our own distributors. We'll turn in our own distributors if somebody is doing something wrong in order to maintain that fair marketplace. So we really appreciate everything you do here, and thanks to the great work from your staff. We're your partner in, we have a real similar mission, honestly, distributors in the OLCC. We're selling alcohol and we're regulating it too. We care a lot about regulation. We're your partner in this, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. So thanks.
Good. Any questions?
I have a question in regards to climate in the economy. What are you addressing transportation issues in regards to the environment, the type of fuel these trucks are using, the locations where they are, and what they're doing to our environment? Do you ever address that issue?
Absolutely. Many of our distributors, probably all of them, have converted their forklifts to electric forklifts. They are credit generators for those forklifts under the Oregon Clean Fuels program. So they're earning credits that way. They're doing a lot in terms of truck conversions, and they're very sensitive to those issues. They're obviously using the clean fuels in those trucks. So we're very conscious of environmental issues.
And those trucks do comply with the national issues involving transportation and what's in their truck.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, there were a number of legislative proposals to move trucks to cleaner diesel or cleaner burning engines, and we surveyed our members to see would it make any difference. And it was really targeting older diesel engines, and they said we are all updated. We're beyond the standards that the states wants to set, so that's fine. We're okay with that. So they're moving rather rapidly compared to probably some of the other counterparts that do delivery services, because I think for environmental reasons it's one, but also it just makes business sense for them. So and we've talked to them about idling and things that around certain locations, and for the most part they don't really do it. I mean They've sort of asked staff, and I think part of it's just fuel cost, is we don't need to sit there and idle our engines when unless we're going to take off soon, right? So we don't want to burn more fuel than we need to. So they are, I think it's two, there's two sides to the coin. One is they are environmentally conscious, but two, it makes business sense to them, and so trying to figure out where those opportunities lie, and we have connected them on a few occasions to try to find what programs would help them convert sooner and quicker. So.
Okay, thank you. And the final question is in regards to, you had mentioned that you're actively involved in direct sale or mail, potential of mail direct to consumers in regards to alcohol and wine.
Distributors are not doing any direct. They're not doing direct to consumer sales except for some dock sales at their warehouses. But we do care about the issue just in terms of preserving a safe regulated system. And right now there's this hole in the system in that these third-party entities are picking up from retail establishments and delivering to people in their homes. And those folks are not licensed by the OLCC. They're not trained to check for minors, whether they're delivering to a minor. They're not trained to check for VIP, for visibly intoxicated people, in the way that you require somebody working in a restaurant to be trained. And so I think there is a significant hole in the system right now. It's great that the modern marketplace allows alcohol to get to consumers in their home. We just need to figure out how we can do that safely.
As part of our national trade associations, we've learned from other states and what they're doing and how they're handling it. So, I mean, that's been one of the advantages. Is a lot of states are sort of grappling with this issue right now and trying to figure out what's the best system in the more modern marketplace for delivery of everything, including alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any other questions?
I'll just comment. This was fantastic, and I'm somewhat familiar with a lot of this, but it's always great to see the video and sort of see it distilled down, and it certainly the background that I've grown up in this, it informs a lot of decisions, and I think it's been really great to see a successful model like this on the alcohol side and to be able to see the parallels as we're regulating other industries and looking at it. One thing in particular that's been a notable area of convergence has been the CBD issue, and I've appreciated the guidance of the wholesalers and working with staff on looking at that, because it's certainly one of those cutting-edge things. And just one more comment on the environmental thing. Isn't it accurate that a lot of times when the new distribution facilities come online or are renovated, they typically are some of the most state-of-the-art in terms of environmental practices, using solar to run the refrigerators. So, I mean, it seems like, from my experience, the beer distributors are actually really good stewards of environmental leadership. Would that be an accurate statement?
I agree with that. Yes. And if you'd ever like to take a tour of a distributorship or a couple of them in the state, we would love to host you. So let us know.
We're going to use facilities we know, or somebody else? I couldn't resist that. Thank you so much.
You.
Listen, I know you have a wonderful working relationship with our people. As long as I'm chairman, you don't have any problems in front of us, obviously. So once every 6 months, you can come here and say hello to us. So why don't you do the same thing in June?
We'd love to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We now have the Oregon Wine Association, and we ask them to come every 3 months. So come on in and sit down. And Tom, Brittany, introduce yourself, please, and good morning. We want you here every 3 months until we say every 6 months.
Thank you for that. No, we're happy to be on double secret probation. We value these exchanges. Thank you, Chair Rosenbaum, for the invitation. For the record, I'm Tom Danowski, President of the Oregon Wine Board.
And I am Bertoni Faustin, owner of Abbey Creek Vineyard and Winery. Also board member of the Oregon Wine Board.
And I mean that sincerely. We really do welcome and appreciate the invitation and the chance to tell you what's going on in our industry, because there's quite a bit more color and more, certainly more texture and dimension than what you get just from the headlines covering our industry all the time. So let me dive in. A few things we want to touch on today during our brief few minutes. Give you a little bit of an update on what's happening in the industry generally, maybe beyond just what you've seen in the media. We want to be responsive to a request that came on our last visit to touch on some diversity and inclusiveness work that is going on in our industry, and give you a chance to talk a little bit with us about questions you may have. This might look familiar, this slide, just to give you a quick snapshot of some of the key metrics in our industry. We are spread throughout the entire state, Medford and Ashland, all the way up the I-5 corridor, all the way out Hood River, the Oregon side of the Walla Walla Valley, and even in Central Oregon now. Just very nearly 800 wineries, as you can see, and about 30,000 jobs attributable to our industry sector. For the last several years, I have been sort of wearing two hats, two organizational responsibilities. One is the Oregon Wine Growers Association, which, as you can see in this exhibit, is funded by membership dues and is primarily dedicated to legislative, regulatory, policy work on behalf of all growers and winemakers in Oregon. Simultaneously, I'm also president of the Oregon Wine Board. That is a state commission funded by a $25 per ton tax on every ton of grapes grown and crushed in Oregon to make wine. And that is a semi-independent state agency. We are dedicated to areas completely separate from public policy. The Wine Board uses its tax money to spend on scientific research into grape growing and winemaking, also marketing, media relations work, and also education for the industry and education for our customers about how to sell more wine. You've probably read in the last few weeks perhaps about some changes happening to these two organizations. The Oregon Wine Growers Association will be moving to carve out its own separate board, unique from those overlaps with the Oregon Wine Board of Directors. Right now it is one board, and that came from the tradition years and years back of when it was just hard to find volunteers for Oregon's emerging wine business. And when they found one, they grabbed you, and they asked you to really serve to the full extent of your capabilities. And so for years, the boards have been the same, and my predecessors wore the same two hats that I wore. That is ending. We are now going in a disciplined and focused way to clarify the work of the Wine Growers Association, moving towards its own board and dedicated staff. And the Wine Board, where I will remain president, will continue to have governor-appointed board members. This is very similar to what has gone on in other areas. Washington State, most notably, they had the same kind of transition a few years ago, where their lobbying and public policy group was separated from their marketing group, and is a sign of a maturing industry that the organizations need to focus on their respective charters. One of the slides I touched on during my last visit, excuse me, gave just a little bit of an insight into a really critical dynamic in our Oregon wine business, which is the tremendous interest among out-of-state winemakers in Oregon grapes that they can make and sell as Oregon-labeled wine. And there's no federal restriction on that. Any winemaker anywhere in the country can come and get Oregon grapes and make that wine. You are required, however, to label it Oregon rather than one of our sub-growing regions or AVAs, Appalachian, like the Willamette Valley, Rogue Valley. You are required to label it Oregon. What's interesting here is that for the first time, we're now up very nearly at 24% of the state's wine grape crop every year being bought and going to out-of-state winemakers. And that is a sign of the demand for Oregon wine. It's also a tremendous testament to the skill of the farming and the quality of those grapes. This is one of those dramatic shifts that is almost tectonic in nature. It's been happening slowly, somewhat out of our field of vision at times, how rapidly this has grown, but it's created some real powerful growing pains in our industry that we've certainly all experienced this year that go just beyond.
One question,
Sure.
Tom. Out of the 24%, do you happen to know what percentage actually goes overseas?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Rosenbaum, for that question. Very, very little, if any, Oregon grape raw material leaves the country, but there are approximately 3.5% to 4% of our finished goods sales are exported out of the country. But very, very little, just the logistics of transporting grapes. And there could potentially be a little bit going to Western Canada, but the logistics of transferring raw material is such that it's usually within the contiguous states here. But that growth in tonnage leaving the state and the interest in that tonnage from out-of-state winemakers is one of the dynamics that is certainly shaping our industry. I want to also just touch on something and acknowledge a great suggestion from Executive Director Marks that we connect as a wine industry with a resource that many of us had not known about called Oregon Solutions, which perhaps some of you are aware of. It is a facilitated, mediating kind of service that is paid for in part by the state. The governor has some discretionary money that he or she can dedicate to certain projects. We are not yet at that point. We are at the very, very initial phase in our work with Oregon Solutions. And it grew out of the need that Director Mark saw to connect us with Oregon Solutions, given what transpired during our last legislative session and some of what you all experienced on your trips around the state. It is a really good time for some industry healing, and we could use some outside assistance. So we appreciate Director Mark's suggestion and that connection. We're at the starting point of that work. And if I am invited to come back, we're going to keep you updated on that because we appreciate the invitation to be a part of their process, and it's very timely for us now. So we'll keep you updated on that. Let me turn the program over to my colleague, our Oregon Wine Board Director, Bertoni Fosten.
Good morning, guys, and thank you for allowing us to address you again today. Outside of all of my professional titles, one that I'm going to share with you today is being Oregon's first black winemaker. 12 years ago, I never knew the impact of that very statement was going to have on the industry or my life personally as well. How many of us can wake up and say that what you do inspires and empowers others to be great? But now, 12 years later, outside of just my story, what's more important is my message. And the loudest message that I've done, it was in 2015. I actually produced a documentary called Red, White, and Black, and it's about my story and some other underrepresented minorities in the industry. So, cue that up, Tom. Or
Laura's got it.
Laura's got it. Thank you. You don't have to rent it to watch the trailer.
Do I just click the trailer?
Correct. Just hit watch the trailer.
Multiple streams of
Being a black man in the wine industry, you obviously are the minority. You are the one. You're being judged. You're being looked at. I feel the industry doesn't want to tell that story.
There's challenges every day about being a black man in the wine business.
The wine industry in Oregon is a very white-driven, androcentric kind of environment. Very seldom do you see people of color.
People say, well, what difference does it make what color is the person who makes my wine? But we still need to continue the conversation because people are really stupefied and dumbfounded when I show up.
We have so many other minorities, not just African Americans, women, Hispanic, and the whole LGBT community as well.
A lot of people tell me that when I became winemaker, I'm a pioneer because there are not really a lot of Hispanic winemakers in the industry.
Being a woman-owned business makes us a minority. Being a gay-owned business makes us a minority. Being a Jewish-owned business makes us a minority. I think that's okay.
At the end of the day, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to change the face of the next 50 years of winemakers, wine drinkers, wine consumers, and the industry alike. And so I believe today we will hear from a direct question that Commissioner Harper had about what is the industry doing to deal with diversity, et cetera, inclusion. And you have that slide. Outside of talking about it, we decided to do something about it. The WVVA, the Willamette Valley Vintners Association, we created a task force to start talking about DE&I. And I just want to point out as well, I think it's easy to measure DE&I, but what's important is that word belongingness. And I think there's an intention that goes behind that. So that's where we're intentional about the events that we hold, the messaging, even in your print ads, the pictures and the faces that you're using. And that's where that other belongingness is going to come from as well.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
And right here, this is kind of the purpose of the task force. The D&I task force exists to enhance the diversity, inclusion, and equity opportunities for our members and program consumers. And as you can see, the list of members there are all industry folks that have been in the industry long enough, there you can see we also have a great line of women as well. I think that's probably our largest minority group in Oregon wine is going to be the women that are involved also. And that's kind of the idea of how we're going to start to change what's going on in the lack of diversity or the messaging of it.
So any successful entrepreneur, I always ask the same question. I love to see things grow, okay? I mean businesses grow. And I ask the same question to everybody. What motivated you to get involved in this?
Oh, well, we don't have as much time for the full story, but go ahead.
Yeah, I want to hear that because I think that's important to understand what kind of diversity you're going to get. What's your motive behind getting involved in this business and seeing it grow?
Well, I am an accidental winemaker. My motive came from tragedy, actually. My family, I'm first-generation Haitian American. I was born in Brooklyn, New York.
I was born in the Bronx.
Okay, there you go. What's up? But in '99, I was trying to get to California. Ended up here at OHSU, worked for anesthesiology. But in '07, my father passed. And it was that the catalyst of feeling that I wasn't living up to that legacy. I call it the immigrant hustle. You know, when your parents, your siblings come from someplace else. And I felt I was living life safe. So I quit my day job. The whole thing about the grapes or being in the industry was the property that I ended up buying from my in-laws happened to have 5 acres of grapes for a farm deferral. No one in the family, they were all smart enough not to get into the wine industry. I didn't even drink at that time. But I just looked around one day and said, you know what, I'm going to make wine. My plan B was I was going to make raisins if it didn't work out. But that's kind of and Tom and I were just talking about that. The point of my life I was at, you know, it didn't matter. I was at this point, and he was talking about the recession. It was '07. But it was the sense of I wanted to do me and be free, you know, at the end of the day. I think about my family coming to the States, being immigrants. So many people ask, well, how did they succeed? They had no choice, you know, and that's the same motivation that I use every day when I wake up and what I do. The industry, and you guys all know, the industry kind of doesn't make sense, you know, at the end of the day. But I had to decide, instead of trying to fit into it, I decided to take it and make it my own, you know, and that same, and I'll be a hypocrite if I was going to tell you that 12 years ago, I knew I was the first black winemaker and I was going to go ahead and be your pioneer, and I didn't. It wasn't until 2015 that I decided to go ahead and own that hat and the ownership of, you know, being that trailblazer, being the pioneer. To sum it up, I typically say it's great that I'm the first, but it's more important that I'm not the last. And that's kind of what we're doing. I'm using the industry and leveraging that in order to essentially change the world.
So the reason I asked you that question, and I really want to bring it up, is that you got into this accidentally to a certain extent.
Yes, sir.
And you're the first black person who is doing this. The question really comes in is, isn't it your responsibility to look and try to understand, to bring in other people of color that have that motivation to do it? That's a tough thing to do in the grape industry, isn't it? I'm just thinking out loud. How do you motivate people to come into it?
Well, I motivate people to think differently. The grape industry, a term that I just heard from McMinnville City Council was toxic nostalgia. Following these traditions, you know, at the end of the day, if it doesn't make any sense, why keep following them? Why don't we start creating some new ones? And that's sort of the inspiration and the motivation I give folks now. You know, you can actually do things your way in an industry that has thousands of years of a head start on us. I've proven that being in the industry for 12 years, opening up a second location in downtown Portland in February, still, but not just following status quo, finding new, unique ways. At the end of the day, I'm not in the wine business. I'm in the people business.
That's right.
You know,
That's
so
exactly right.
And that's how I've been able to be successful, and that's how I'm trying to show others that they can do this too without following the traditional route.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking today, coming before us. This definitely speaks to me. I commend the Oregon Wine Association for finding this and starting this task force, and for your figuring out the point of entry into this industry. your hustle, your drive, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming and speaking
Thank
to
you,
us
Commissioner
today.
Floyd. Yeah.
And Chair, definitely, Tom, thank you so much for bringing Bertrand. I've had a chance to visit his showroom. My whole entire family really enjoyed it. All over 21, as you know. And again, the ability to create that commission, that committee, to move forward, because it's not about just that one job that you have, but it's the development of the other areas that will create employment for people throughout the state of Oregon. When we did our tour of the wineries across the state of Oregon, it's phenomenal. I don't know if you have the same, as they say, fertile ground as they have in other parts of the state, but we still can make a difference. And again, I commend you and thank you. And with, you look up in the grace of God, sometimes that sun comes out, sometimes it doesn't. But it's just amazing how you were able to sustain the way you are now. And with this committee, hopefully you can break off a little bit of money so they can do a little bit more things to support, because it's all about, property and land and having the professionals to come in and do those workshops that everybody always needs. So thank you both.
Thanks, Commissioner Harper. Thank you, Commissioner.
That's well said, Commissioner Harper. Thank you also for the invitation a couple months ago to focus on this specifically. It not only affects our business ownership, it affects our current and future workforce, the customers we sell to, retailers and restaurateurs, and the consumers who buy from them. It is a whole ecosystem that we are trying to stimulate and to drive inclusiveness all the way through the system. So appreciate the question last time we were here.
Thank you. It's all about tourism.
Yes, sir.
And traveling up and down just to pull over at a multi-million-dollar facility and drink multi-million-dollar prices of wine. Prices need to come down.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Please come back in 3 months.
You bet. We'll do.
Okay.
We'll do. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Yes.
He's a Brooklyn guy.
You guys are real city.
He's a smart.
Oh, no doubt.
Good morning, Nikki.
Good morning.
You need no introduction, so I'm not going to give you one.
Oh, darn it. Good morning, Chair.
That's a compliment.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. For the record, I'm Nikki Leslie, Purchasing Coordinator of the Purchasing Division. I'm here today to present the listing of activity for the month of September, October, and November. Under tab 1, you'll find a detailed list of activity. Staff recommends the Commissioners confirm the 42 items on the list. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Chair, I just have one. When did Pabst Blue Ribbon start making whiskey?
Just as their first test into it, we listed in September, and they just started it. This is we just got the listing. Our last listing meeting September 2019.
Okay. Well.
And it's doing quite well. Might have to go out and get a bottle and give it a try.
We were able to taste the peanut butter and jelly or peanut butter whiskey.
Oh, I remember.
How is that doing? I saw that on this
the
list.
The screwball is going off the charts.
Really?
We're averaging probably about 400 cases per month right now.
Wow.
Yeah. It is.
Peanut butter whiskey.
It is amazing.
Huh?
And we tried it.
Yes, we did try it. And I was curious. I thought either people would really hate it or really like it.
Oh, no, it is. Like, we bring in like 600 cases and it'll go out before the month even over.
Wow.
Who'd have thunk?
Well, I guess.
Who knows,
if I
right?
have some extra people I
I'd
need
like
Christmas
the
presents
dead
for, I
rabbit
guess.
whiskey. I need a motion if there's
Chair.
no...
I move
Commissioner?
to confirm the 42 items for September, October, and November as proposed by staff.
Before we vote, let the record reflect that Commissioner Rebell is now with us, please.
Commissioner Curran.
Yes.
Commissioner Floyd.
Yes.
Commissioner Harper.
Yes.
Commissioner Miletus.
Yes.
Commissioner Pausick.
Yes.
Commissioner Reval.
Yes.
Chair Rosenbaum.
Yes. That was easy enough.
That
Happy
was
holidays,
easy
Nikki.
today.
Oh. Good morning, Brian.
Morning. I'll get set up.
Yeah, I know. This is unusual.
I did.
Morning, Chair Rosenbaum, Commissioners. For the record, Brian Fleming, Director of Retail. I have before you Salem Downtown. This comes as a result of Agent Doug Benedict retiring after 39 years. Jim, the district manager, presented him with plaque. He will not be here today, but we have two applicants today for the Salem Downtown location. This is approximately $1 million. The 12-month is slightly under $1 million. It's had some declines in the store. It's ready for energy, enthusiasm, excitement after 39 years with Doug. And I think you have a couple candidates here today that would like to present their business plan for the future.
All right, Chair.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian, share with everybody the location. It's across the street from the location of the store.
Commissioner Harper, the location is, dead centered, downtown convention center, close to the Capitol, was well known for legislators, governors as shopping there years and years ago. So it's very centrally located in downtown. And I think both of the proposals today will show you something a little bit different for the future. So with that,
one quick thing in terms of us looking at this, you said keep in mind it may take years to build a business. Would you just go into that for a second so we understand what your concerns are, where it would take years to build a business?
Chair Rosenbaum, so this is our advertisement where we introduce to everyone. This could apply to a new location. It could apply to this location that's had slight declines. The idea of running this store in $1 million and having 17 people as staff is crazy and absurd. So this is going to be a small location building up the existing consumer business and one getting more of the backdoor licensee business that's been lost. Much of that is this store did not choose to deliver generally. In this store, it's been manually entered for years in terms of inventory, sales information into OLAS, which is our system. This comes with an absolute requirement. You will have a point-of-sale machine on site at the location. This agent has been there a long time. So there is several enhancements that I think both applicants will be able to share.
Okay.
In terms of building the business, this business is built, established. It was over $1 million. It's just had gradual decline. We've added a couple stores in Salem 1. The marketplace has chosen to deliver and call in the downtown area for licensees. So a lot of that will be up to any new applicant to recover some of that and then hopefully introduce a new consumer experience, which is about 60% of the volume, a little over 65% of the volume in this store today. Like I said, the 12-month rolling, it was slightly under $1 million, and the bulk of that was in the licensee sales. The consumer sales were, I believe, slightly up in this store.
What did you say, Brian? I'm sorry. What did you say about the licensees in the area? Has there been a decline of licensees?
There is some. I don't know the licensee specifics. I know that the decline in the sales to a licensee through this store has been from other liquor stores saying, I'll service your business, I'll deliver, where this store had chosen not to be able to
not to deliver. Okay.
And we were never open on Sundays. I'm hoping today we'll talk about Sunday sales. Thank you so much. And I'll bring up your first applicant. Under tab 1, Adam Dabrowski, and you'll have a PowerPoint presentation in front of you.
This is what they're going to use.
You can use that one.
Yeah, yes.
And for the two applicants, please remember to state your name for the record.
Thank you.
That's quite nice. Thank
Mr.
you.
Fleming,
I'm
how
impressed.
much time do you want to give them?
With only two applicants, Commissioner Revolt, it's up to you, but we've indicated it would be between 5 and 7. So if we could go to the 7, 6.
6.
6.
6.
Okay, if they practiced in the mirror, I hope they can go faster today. With that said, I'll go ahead.
Who's
Thank
keeping
you.
time? Marvin?
Always does.
He's on it.
Good morning.
What are we buying? Okay. Oh.
Is this the clicker?
What I'll do is I'll say 1 minute when you have 1 minute left.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Commissioners, for your time and consideration for my agency appointment for 12/31. My name is Adam Dabrowski. I'm excited to present how we plan to transform the way liquor is purchased in relocating the downtown Salem location. I will briefly describe our action plan and how we will minimize downtime while relocating, and talk about the marketing plan and company strategy. Why am I the right person for the job? My wife thinks I have great assets, and I have been running the successful West Salem liquor store since January 2011. At the end of 2010, West Salem sold under $1.8 million, and this year we're forecasting for $5.5 million while keeping an outstanding rating with the OLCC. I love this business and who we serve. We continually give to and work with the Salem Kaiser Education, CASA, Toys for Tots, and donate to many other programs, and I'd love to continue doing this in downtown Salem. Our family motto is work hard and be kind to people. My family, speaking of, this is my lovely wife, Jamie. She owns a company named Projects Marketing Company. I have a son, Quinn, who's 11, and a daughter, Ella, who's 8. The mission of Downtown Liquor Depot is to offer a wide variety of products at competitive prices to conduct business of selling alcohol in a responsible manner, and this will reflect favorably on the citizens of Salem. Initially, we plan, while operating out of the existing space, we'll open up the floor plan and bring in beer and wine, and then we go big to a high street location where we believe we've retained the optimal Salem location, with street parking in front and a 3-level parking garage across the street. For people who use public transit, there are 3 bus stops and 15 routes within 1 block. Remodeling the new location, we'll do a 1920s theme centered around the history of Salem, highlighting bars and prohibition. We will refresh the exterior of the building, painting the brick dark gray and light colors above. And the High Street location will be easy to spot with an exterior lit sign and window decals. And with bright new energy efficient lighting in the front and around the outside of the building, the High Street location will be more friendly and have a safer feel. Inside, upscale and elegant shelving with featured Oregon sections for wine, beer, and liquor. Shorter shelving throughout the center of the store to keep a easy, clear view of the rest of the store. Large humidor will feature upscale cigar lines, cigarettes, smaller bottles, and they will be safe and available behind a quartz countertop with 3 available registers at it. We will continue the 1920s look and feel with a tasting bar in the front of the store for customers who choose to sample OLCC approved and vendor supplied servers. Stained concrete floors and antique display pieces will continue the accent. Identifiers will be made from wood staves and backlit. An advanced security camera system with monitors facing the cashiers will keep the store surveilled while people are at checkout. For marketing, we will use social media, thanks to Jamie. When paid promotion to markets, targeting markets we want to expand into and markets that we're already in. Launch of a new website that's SEO optimized for searchability, and we'll be involved with any and all associations and groups in the downtown Salem area. For the accounts, we'll actively promote the new location and delivery service that we offer to bars and restaurants, and I will work with suppliers on all the new exciting and upcoming products. Currently, as he said, 12/31 sells just over $1 million and is open about 307 days a year. We'll plan on opening up an extra to 361 days a year. Extending the days and hours alone should give us an additional $250,000 a year in sales and 800 sales hours. So brief timeline. January, we plan on freshening up the current location and starting the remodel of the High Street location. And in April, have the grand opening. And as for the personnel for the new location, I've planned to utilize some of my all-stars that I have at the West Salem store and help with the new transition for my staff at the new location.
1 minute.
Thank you for this opportunity and time and consideration for the downtown Salem store. I appreciate it. And thank you, commissioners, and happy holidays.
Beautiful
Questions?
presentation deck. Beautiful, beautiful presentation deck. I think probably the most beautiful one I've seen since March, you know. Beautiful.
Any questions?
Chair, I do have a question. All right. So I want to know about moving locations. Why you decided on this location, why you think it's better, and go into that a little bit.
Okay. So downtown right now, where it sits, there's really only a few parking spots up front, and they're labeled for the bank next door to it. So the parking behind it is now in the back on a gravel parking lot. There's no real designated area for parking for that spot. And so the High Street location for parking alone, it does have some meter parking in front that doesn't work well for people that are shopping at the mall or for the Salem Center Mall or the Cinnabar. So having that will be fairly open parking for us going into the store. And then for the holidays, people are already going to be downtown at the Salem Center Mall and going to the movies and having fun. So they'll be right there. Foot traffic will be available for us. Just being next door neighbors to the Cinnabar and the mall, it'll open that up and having parking across the street.
I was curious at exactly where it was.
So directly across the street from the location is a 3-story parking garage, and there's ample street parking and parking around the back. Also, for the delivery, there's an alley that the trucks can go down and easily not block traffic and keep the flow. It flows really nicely in the background for storage.
Okay.
It's really nice.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Commissioner?
Thanks. You mentioned in your written material that you have a passion for this, and you also underscored the fact that you work with all-stars. Do you have maybe a good example you could provide us with as to both your passion and how you develop your all-stars?
Okay, so it's funny. I'm going to go into it. You're going to love it.
You had a minute.
When I was a younger boy, my father would ask me what I wanted to do, and I always said I wanted to own a liquor store, and he thought I was crazy. So my simple explanation for it was that people have what you want, and they're happy to buy it. So that started my passion, and since then, after experiencing all different ideas and avenues in alcohol, I've become a connoisseur and someone who enjoys alcohol in the correct amounts responsibly.
No worries.
Right? And so having that understanding of how it's made and being able to share the knowledge of what goes into it and how the painstaking efforts these people take to create such wonderful things, that's what drove my passion for it. And as for my staff, I really instill that into them. I instill the fact that these people are coming in for not just a spirit, but they're looking for an experience. They want to be able to take something home and tell a story and explain how things have been made and be able to talk about that. So I do a lot of education with my staff. We've got a book in the back that gives a full explanation on alcohols, how they're made, and what goes into each one of them. So,
thank you.
Chair Rosenbaum.
Commissioner?
So 5 years ago, I learned to appreciate the retail operators that we had as part of our family. By the same token, I realized that we needed to change a lot in this state so that, quite frankly, women within a certain category of age and income would want to go into a liquor store and buy products to have a story and an experience. So I'll be very interested and very excited to see whichever you are successful here, turn that particular facility to somewhere I'd want to go. And I'm old.
Yeah.
So keep in mind that whichever of you get it, you'll get a visitor.
All right, very good.
And the chair has said in the past, if it doesn't look like what you said it's going to look like and be an experience, I'll say hi.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to add on that is that in West Salem, the work we've done inside that store has brought a ton of new people coming in from West Salem. When we took over, it was basically just a dungeon. You know, it was this hole that people didn't want to go into. And so expanding that store out, we moved it over one location and expanded the floor footprint and had the ability to freshen it up, brighten the inside, and have, you know, the things inside there that would draw more than just that one bottle purchaser into the store, people that want to come in and have an experience and shop. So it's been fun.
Thank you.
Hey, Chair, a last question.
Sure.
Thank you. It says on your bio that at the current liquor location you're at now, it says you're the manager, but then it says part owner. Tell me about part ownership.
So
that was my question. I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
So we're part of an LLC. My father, Dean O'Donnell, is the chosen agent for that location. Adam has managed it, and we both are part owners of that location as well.
Okay.
What percentage?
We have the majority percentage. I think it's 51%.
You have 51%.
Yes.
Of the LLC.
So, Brian, sort of explain to me the separation in regards to, are they a current agent at the other location, or how does that LLC work?
Commissioner Harper, so the LLC, the individual is named as Dean O'Donnell, who has the agency agreement. Their LLC, which is typically the pay to or FEINs for payment, is the LLC, which has always been allowed. Only until recently, 2012 or 13, is where LLCs and corporations could apply to become a liquor agent as well as an individual. So they have an LLC for the company. The agency itself resides with Dean O'Donnell as the liquor agent.
So in clarity, they're going to maintain the 51% of the other liquor store through this LLC. And then this store will be just in the family LLC, which is, it's not your name. It'll be a different LLC? Or can you explain that to me?
So I plan on having the agency in as my name as the person that holds the title license, and then run the business under the LLC. It just adds for protections for the business, and it makes tax and preparation just so much easier to have to deal with.
But
it'll be a separate LLC for our
okay,
family.
yeah. So Brian, what you're sharing with us is that they will be, if honored to receive the store, Adam will be the agent, and that's all I'm concerned
Mr. Harper,
about.
yes, the appointed agent would be Adam Dabrowski. I hope I got the last right. Adam,
okay,
for the next applicant is an LLC. So you're seeing two today. One's an individual, one's a corporate LLC, which are all allowable.
Right.
His ownership has to do with an LLC of their own. For the West Salem location, the agent of record is still Dean O'Donnell.
Okay. Right. So Mr. Dino, at the other store in Salem, he's the agent there.
That's correct.
So they will not be able to say they own two stores, if I understand this correctly.
That's entirely correct. That's correct.
Well, that was certainly one of my questions, and I'm glad you asked that, Commissioner. You got approximate startup costs of $150,000. You've got anticipated revenue of $135,000. So you're going to operate at a loss the first year, right?
Yes, just because the basics of getting that new location started, having everything built and up to date.
So you may double or triple that. You don't know. That's one of the reasons I asked the question at the beginning, is that this is going to take some work.
Yes.
So it's going to. What do you anticipate? What year do you anticipate making a profit on this? Second or third?
I believe by the second year, we'll be turning a full profit on the business and completely reimbursing the startup costs by year 5.
Okay.
Sure.
My only other question is, where is the St. Paul Rodeo or whatever?
St. Paul Rodeo is just outside of Woodburn.
And where?
Just outside of Woodburn. They have a big 4th of July.
I never heard of it.
My birthday's July 2nd, so I had some friends and we went out there, and that's where we met. That's where you're talking about.
It's not quite as big as the Pilsen Round.
My goodness, here goes.
You know where it is?
Yes, I do. I've been
my
there
first rodeo.
several times.
Still a hoot and holler.
By Malala.
Go ahead, Brian.
Chair and Commissioners, for both applicants, it was not specific enough. I think it's what you plan to do with the other business. Are you going to be the traditional non-exclusive is today, or are you going to offer?
Oh, they're going to offer everything else too. I saw that.
Okay? So in
we
the
read it.
presentation,
with lottery.
We
make
read
sure
it.
because that's
be
the
ashamed of
incremental.
yourself. You think we don't read this stuff?
No. I'm
Chair.
just making sure it's on the record.
I do it. Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Have you thought about how you're going to manage one store and then do all that you've proposed in this plan?
Absolutely, yeah. I have my aunt, Jamie's aunt, actually, it's my aunt-in-law. She's been assisting me in managing that store for 7.5 years. So having her there, I have no worries that the store will be managed correctly, and I'll be able to bounce back and forth. I'll spend my majority of the time by far in the downtown location, especially to get everything up and running, and spending basically 7 days a week there and popping back and forth and helping. I'm sure I'll have to do some orders and whatnot just to keep that store functioning the way I want it to. But I have no worries about that
We
store.
also have a very strong team at the store that have been with
Building
us a
this.
very long time that will be helping us with the training of the new location as well. So
They're really close together too, aren't they? I mean, or
West
is it?
Salem's
It's
right
like less than a
over-
mile.
Yeah.
Long ways away.
Yeah.
The bridge is a long ways away.
Yeah. Oh,
in
yeah.
Salem, it's a long ways.
Yeah.
So excuse me,
Maybe
Chair.
you walk.
Chair. So Brian, Adam just said that he's going back and forth. For my mind, I'm thinking that he is just applying for this store and he will spend 100% of his time at the new store. What am I missing? Why are you going back and forth?
Just to assist the store
It's
to
his
make sure
business.
I've got an vested interest in that store. So
He's got a stake in it. I mean, what to me is interesting is that, you know, I'm just thinking out loud. Okay, you basically own the store you're in now because you got a 51% ownership. Although you don't have, it's not recognized as such. You now going to have another store. Don't create a precedent and come back here the third time if you get this, because you're not going to get 3 stores right in a row on it, regardless of what you do. That's what I'm thinking, you know, out loud.
I understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I will bring up the second applicant, GP Associates, which is Janelle. I hope I don't butcher the last name. Poirier. Pretty good. Nice.
Hello.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you kindly. Thank you.
That's what Laura's doing.
Yeah. Well, it's it makes sense. I've come to really have a lot of affection for the system we have. I just feel like
And again, you'll have 6 minutes with a minute warning.
Let me.
It's not at the beginning. Take your names.
Good morning. My name is Janelle Poyer, and this is my husband, John. Thank you for the opportunity to present our business proposal. This is my second attempt to become an agent. I presented over 2 years ago for the Estacada store. It's an honor to be here again. This is something I really want to achieve. I've served in retail for nearly 40 years, 20 in grocery and 20 in retail pharmacy. During my career, I've held numerous positions, giving me a variety of responsibilities and experiences, as you can see on the slide. Salem is growing. The estimated population is up 8.3% since the last census. 30% of residents are between the ages of 25 and 44, making them prime liquor store consumers. The majority of residents are educated and employed. This is a map. Note the 2 arrows. The lower one is marking where the current store is located, and the upper one is where we propose to move. The address is 702 High Street. It's 2 blocks east and about 7 blocks north of the current location. The benefits of the proposed move would include a larger, cleaner space with more functional shape, updated electric and HVAC. It's outside of the one-way street grid. It's very easily accessible from the parkway. It has paved parking and functioning lighted outdoor signage. Also, the neighborhood's undergoing improvement and growth. Examples within just a 2-block radius include the new police station currently under construction and proposed to bring 200 employees to the neighborhood when complete. MAPS Credit Union is expanding and adding a branch, which will bring customers to the neighborhood. The existing building is offices only. And an apartment building with retail space on the ground floor is being developed. We're extending the business hours 68%, which is 33 more hours every week. We'll open earlier, close later, and now be open on Sundays too. We believe that this store has huge growth opportunity. We estimate that by expanding the hours, as explained, converting to non-exclusive license, expanding the liquor selection, and renewing our service to the licensees, the liquor sales will increase by 30% overall. The current sales floor at the existing location is roughly 600 of the store's 2,200 square feet. It's a very long, narrow space with wasted square footage on offices, hallways, and an oversized stockroom. The new sales floor is more than twice as big at 1,436 square feet. Its shape allows for better merchandising, resulting in a more comfortable shopping experience. These are pictures of the new location. Since it's basically a blank slate, it'll require minimal changes before we could move in fixtures and product. This slide shows our proposed layout with the fixtures and coolers. For perspective, the left edge of the layout is the front of the store along High Street. The liquor shelving behind the registers is for travelers, pints, and any high-dollar bottles for increased theft deterrence. These are examples of our cash wrapper check stand counter and the category signage. We've chosen a black and white motif to play off the existing flooring. The stockroom of the existing location is bigger than necessary with some shelving and organization as in the proposed picture. Some valuable square footage could be used to expand that sales floor. We will achieve product expansion, as previously mentioned, through increasing the liquor selection, but we'd also add beer, wine, cigars, and lottery. Key points of our standard operating procedure include a more aggressive age policy to further prevent accidental sales to minors, carding if we believe they're younger than 30. As for loss prevention, we'd be beefing up the alarm system and always keep minimal cash on site. For ensuring appropriate inventory control, we'll use the POS movement reports and make necessary order point adjustments, audit the counts daily, keep the sales floor stocked and interesting. As for merchandising, the gondolas will be set perpendicular to the sales floor, allowing employees unobstructed view of the entire floor, which will be continually replenished and faced. The stockroom will be kept clean and organized. We've discovered that many are unaware of the current store's existence. We need to get the word out. We'll advertise in multiple formats, including print, website, and social media like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll visit the downtown businesses, increase outdoor signage, and being open for business during the high traffic times should also help to get noticed. We'll increase counter sales with the business hour and product expansions, but also by keeping the website and social media up to date, posting drink recipes that use new and sale liquors, increase the in-store vendor events, provide a comfortable sales floor with wide aisles, good lighting, and visible category signage, and always suggestive sell add-on items. We'll increase the licensee sales by offering same-day delivery, visiting regularly to ensure we're exceeding their service expectation, distributing flyers of available new items, and watch the weekly OLCC report for new licensee applicants in our area. We believe strongly in community involvement and support. We are going to join the chamber and use community partners like the Union Gospel Mission. We skip past that. These final slides show our timeline for completing specific tasks. In closing, I want to emphasize how much I love serving the retail public. I've succeeded due to my spectacular customer service skills, strong management skills, and effective inventory control. This can be demonstrated by how I've quickly built sales in new stores as well as turned around troubled locations. You may think it's an unusual progression to change from pharmacy to liquor, but there are actually numerous similarities. Both have set pricing. Both are strictly governed by laws, rules, and regulations. Both require very accurate inventory counts with regular reconciliations. I'm proud to say that I have a perfect pharmacy inspection and license record, and I would love the opportunity to use my skills in the liquor management. I encourage each of you to read the letters of recommendation that I gave you earlier prior to making your decision today. Thanks a lot.
Very good.
Perfect timing.
I can't make it stop.
You can keep going then. Right?
Keep going. There we go. And it's also going off in here. I hate it.
It's been going off in here for 2 minutes.
We're open for questions.
Brian, could you tell us the store location that they're proposing, is that different than the store that Adam is proposing?
I will, Commissioner Curran. Both locations are different. They're, I want to say 6 to 8 blocks just around, I guess it's a little to the north. So they both still don't move over the river. It's in an area that we still have to post the location for input. But,
right.
Yeah, they are different locations, but similar in scope of area to the mall,
And do we know if both of those locations are available?
Commissioner Kern, yes, they both are. They've both been working with these landlords
locations
for potential letters of intent to lease.
So with that, I'm going to follow up with, why do you think your location is the best location, and why did you pick that one?
I chose that one because it had a lot of parking, as does the one Adam proposed. This one is on the edge of a neighborhood that's really kind of an up-and-coming neighborhood, and it just has a lot of good features, as does the other one. They're similar properties. This one's not quite as large, but if you're familiar with Salem, it sits behind where they're building the new police station.
Okay. Is it also close to the mall then?
It is. It's only about a block and a half north of the other proposed location, on the same side of High Street.
Okay.
We could walk to back and forth.
Okay. There must be a lot of empty spots in Salem.
There is some
There's two.
access, but there is some downtown renovation
Going on.
that's happening. I think there's big apartment complexes going in. I think they're trying to revitalize the downtown area.
I think that we did not realize that we both had chosen to be, neighborhood sites until we arrived this morning. I think it just shows that that's the neighborhood where the store belongs. I mean, that's the up-and-coming neighborhood. It's outside of the one-way traffic grid, so it makes that neighborhood is much more easily accessible. You're outside of the nightmare parking area of downtown Salem, so it's just a great neighborhood.
Thank you.
So what I find interesting that I'm happy to see is that we have a location that's 2,500 square feet, and the retail operation is 6.
I know.
So for me, this is what I make my point about what we've been trying to accomplish throughout the state, with the help of the industry, by the way, to have buying experiences that the community enjoys, that we enjoy, and that hopefully you as business owners will enjoy. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have any other questions? I have just one or two. I'm looking at the list managing members, and you have both you and John at 50%, and Alicia and Van at nothing. You had crossed out 40. What's going on with that?
Well, we wanted them to be a part of the LLC because in the future we could see passing the business on to them. They live and work in the Salem area currently. So first we were going to give them each 10%, but then we didn't want there to be any problem with them feeling financially responsible. So we included them in the LLC, and they are here today. Ben and Alicia, could you raise your hands? So that is my son and daughter-in-law.
Okay.
So one other question. When was the last time you applied for a license?
That I did 2.5 years ago. It was the Estacada, Oregon store.
Okay. And in that 2.5 years, I read the letter of recommendation from Rolling Hills Liquor. It said, Danielle has spent time with my husband, Brad, and I at our store, familiarizing herself with OLCC inventory regulations. How much time between the last time and now have you spent in that store?
Well, I just decided that I wanted to do this again in November when we applied. And so I've been out there 3 days since then. But the system is very similar to what I've used in pharmacy, the whole order point idea and generating the order. So we went through quite a bit because I caught on to it rather quickly. Brad is also here today. But
you're a very intelligent person, a very driven person.
That is true.
You know, I say that very positively. I'm impressed with you. The question I really want to understand is, why do you want to do this? You're in the pharmacy business. You've been in there. What's the passion you have for this?
Well, the pharmacy, I've done pharmacy for 20 years. The retail climate in pharmacy is drastically changing. If any of you are on prescriptions, you're probably aware. There have been major cuts in labor because the pricing is set. They can't adjust their pricing. You get what you get from the insurance companies. So it's not what it was when I went into it 20 years ago. I became a pharmacist because of the relationship with my customers, and I like to feel like I'm helping people and spend time with them. And retail pharmacy has turned into more of a conveyor belt. I kind of feel like Lucy, on that episode. And you don't get as much time to spend with the people, and that's what it's all about. And I have been good friends with Diane Paskett, agent at Raleigh Hills Liquor, for decades, and they've been in this business for 5 years, and I see how much they enjoy it. We all started together in grocery, so that's how I know the Pasketts. And I just thought, that looks like something that I would be really good at, and I want to do this.
John, you have 50% of this company. You got anything to say?
John's very quiet.
Very quiet. This is her passion. I will join in as time goes by. Currently, I will not be working at the store except on weekends. I work up here. But we want to move back home.
Got it.
We came from the valley.
Sure. Brian, we noticed that the lease agreement with the current owner, agent, goes to 2022. How will that be managed by both the potentially new agents if we do appoint either one?
Commissioner Harper, the landlord has worked with both of the applicants on shorter term. I believe, I have not seen the final, but they have agreements with the landlord in downtown Salem that could let them out sooner than the 2022. And if you have direct information to share with Commissioner Harper, be helpful.
Yes, Commissioner Harper. Jim, the current landlord, whoever ends up getting the store today will have to sign a new lease with him, which he stated will be a 1-year lease, but with 30 days notice from either party, whether it's us or him, the 1-year lease would end. I believe he's interested in turning that space into office rental.
And that won't affect Doug in any way, would it?
Commissioner Harper, no. Doug will be relieved of the responsibilities at time of final audit, and then he will just be retired.
Okay. And then who receives all of Doug's antiques?
The antiques, those are property of the current agent. We value the liquor and things of that nature. If there's incremental, if there's a cooler, that's all part of the agent who's appointed, negotiating with the outgoing agent. It's pretty seamless most of the time.
All right. No one wants a 39-year-old fridge. Is that correct? No.
The commissioners will now go into executive session to deliberate on the agent selection pursuant to the authority of ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub A. Representative of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. Representative of the media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions may be made in executive session. We'll return to open session in this room. Meeting will come back to order. Commissioner Revelle?
Chair Rosenbaum, I move to appoint Adam Dombrowski as the permanent agent store of 1231 Salem Downtown effective January 2020. And may I also make a statement? Oh,
yes,
we
please.
can vote first, if you like.
Commissioner Kern.
Yes.
Commissioner Floyd.
Yes.
Commissioner Harper.
Yes.
Commissioner Miletus.
Yes.
Commissioner Powsett.
Yes.
Commissioner Revelle.
Yes.
Chair Rosenbaum.
Yes.
Commissioner?
Commissioner?
So, Adam, this is where the team here at OLCC sees me do this as a special kind of relationship. I better see this humidor when I walk in your store. Good.
One other statement before we leave. We had a close to an hour discussion, and it was very productive in terms of the commission. That's the only time we really get a chance to come in and talk to each other, in private about whatever issue it is. I implore you not to give up. We were impressed, and you did a nice job. We normally don't do that, but we had a very, very, very good discussion. And my suggestion to you very strongly is two things. One, the next time you come here, put a presentation together the way that Adam did. And two, spend more than 3 days. I've never done this before because we were very impressed with you. Spend more than 3 days in a liquor store. Spend some time in there. It's not critical, but it's good anyway. So thank you, too. We do appreciate you. Okay. Emily, you're up. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Rosenbaum and fellow commissioners. For the record, my name is Emily Febles, and I'm the Rules Coordinator for the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. Today I have one initial action and 3 final actions for your consideration. Under tab A, you'll find the prohibited conduct initial action. This action will amend 845-006-0345 to prohibit the mixing of alcoholic beverages and CBD products at retail liquor licenses for on-premise consumption due to safety concerns identified by the FDA. Recently, the FDA released information regarding safety concerns related to the use of CBD, cannabidiol. The Commission has been working with industry and initiated rulemaking to prohibit the manufacture of alcoholic beverages containing CBD. This rulemaking proposes to prohibit the mixing of alcoholic beverages with CBD at liquor licensed businesses for on-premise consumption. This initial action is distinguishable from the final action being taken in the 2019 alcohol bill and technical package. You'll hear that later today. In that package, the Commission staff proposes to prohibit the manufacture of alcoholic beverages containing CBD and the subsequent sale of those items. With that said, I'd like to ask Kelly Rout, Director of AMP&P, to join me to answer any substantive questions about this action that you may have.
Not really any questions, comments. I think when I first saw this, I always, worry about us getting into too many rules, and there's a lot of stuff. But I think what really turned me around on this is that, in talking to staff, is this is allowing us to open up the discussion further, and I think it's always unclear with initial action versus final action. When to anyone in the industry, the initial action means that we're opening up the discussion and opening up the record, and I think that's a good thing, and that's exactly what's needed with this whole CBD thing, because it's one of those evolving things. So I commend you guys you all on engaging with the industry, and I think that this will provide another opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Kelly Rout, Director of APP. I just wanted to acknowledge that you have captured the intent of the initial action here.
So what's the next step on this? Is there a RAC going to be convened?
Good.
Yes, there'll be a RAC convened to start the discussion about this issue.
That's great. And then what's the timetable on that, Steve? Is that up to you? Or?
Yes. Yes. And, in this case, we really noticed this to take a look at, the mixing of cocktails in particular and CBDs. We know the current guidance that we'll be giving them under existing law, state law, sort of the federal circumstances, just hard to comply with, hard to know you're complying, hard for us to enforce. You're supposed to have the certificate of analysis, know these CBDs should be tested. So one of the reasons for the rulemaking is it just might be efficient for the industry to stay out of trouble by just calling it an adulterant with alcohol and not allowing it for the time being. This initialization of the rulemaking gives you and us the ability to do that, but you don't have to. So I think this gives us a process to consider it further, and we're on track to do that, and that just sort of backs up our other action, and I hope, gain some compliance in the marketplace as it exists now.
So can I ask you a favor, and would you give the commissioners at least a couple of days after the racks are picked? Will you send it to the commissioners on who, not only on this one, but in the future? When I'm not interested in interfering with your decision-making capability, I'm just interested in seeing who's on there before it's finalized. And give the commissioners a chance to at least have input into it. Can we do that? Is there
Definitely.
So just give us a week, before you're going to make the announcement, give us a week and send it to each one of the commissioners. Does this sound reasonable?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Chair.
Yes, Michael.
I move to initiate rulemaking on OAR 845-006-0345 and hold a rulemaking hearing at staff's discretion.
Commissioner Curran?
Yes.
Commissioner Floyd?
Yes.
Commissioner Harper?
Yes.
Commissioner Miletus?
Yes.
Commissioner Pasek?
Yes.
Commissioner Raval?
Yes.
Chair Rosenbaum?
Yes. We have final action on the bottle bill and technical package.
Thank you, Kelly. So under tab B, you will find the first final action for the 2019 bottle bill and technical package. During the 2019 Oregon legislative session, the Oregon legislature made changes to the Oregon bottle bill provisions. This rule package addresses both changes made during that legislative session and some technical issues that have arisen during the management of the bottle bill program. With that said, I'd like to ask Becky Vogel, bottle bill program manager, to join me and answer any substantive questions you have about this action.
Chair. Commissioner? One question I have is, you're going to have to add an additional 10 cents to milk? How are we going to save the milk cartons and come back to the store and get 10 cents?
Commissioner Harper, my name is Becky Vogel. I'm with the Bottle Bill Program. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Of the Liquor Commission. Commissioner Harper, we're not adding it to milk. Milk is exempted under statute, milk and plant-based milks. But people think that all dairy is exempt, and it's not all dairy. It's just milk. So we're narrowing our definition of milk to make that more clear. We have some bottles of beverages that say smoothie on it. They're mainly milk, but they're much more. They have fruit added and different things. So we're making it more clear for the industry and for consumers. And we would never add a deposit to milk or to cartons of milk. So
for the children. For the children.
For the children. Okay.
You go to the store, push the button, and milk comes out of the carton. 10 cents.
It's just bottles and cans.
Okay. When we was in school, you had to pay 10 cents for milk?
Any other questions?
Chair,
Commissioner?
I move to adopt OAR 845-020-0027 and amend OAR 845-020-0016-0025-0035-0040, effective January 1st, 2020.
Commissioner Kern?
Yes.
Commissioner Floyd?
Yes.
Commissioner Harper?
Yes.
Commissioner Miletus?
Yes.
Commissioner Palcic?
Yes.
Commissioner Raval?
Yes.
Chair Rosenbaum?
Yes.
Thank you.
That was easy enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the milk. For milk. Does your body good.
Under tab C, you'll find the second final action for the alcohol bill and technical package to amend divisions 5, 6, 9, and 10. During the 2019 Oregon legislative session, the Oregon legislature made changes to the alcohol provisions in Chapter 845. This rule package addresses both changes made during that legislative session and technical issues that have arisen during the management of the regulated alcohol industry. With that, I would like to ask Devin Morales, an alcohol policy analyst, to join me to answer any substantive questions you have about this action.
Good morning.
Good morning. Any questions? I'm not looking at you in particular.
I want the milk question.
Okay.
Chair? Oh, were you going to comment? I move to adopt OAR 845-006-0410 and to amend 845-005-0410 and -005-0425 and -006-0345 and -006-0485 and -009 -0075 and -010-0205, effective January 1st, 2020.
Commissioner Kern?
Very good.
Yes.
Commissioner Floyd?
Yes.
Commissioner Harper?
Yes.
Commissioner Miletus?
Yes.
Commissioner Palcic?
Yes.
Commissioner Raval?
Yes.
Chair Rosenbaum?
Yes.
You don't get to talk.
Keep on going.
Thanks, Devin.
See you later. Merry Christmas.
Under tab D, you'll find the last final action for the producer application processing deadlines action. This final action adopts permanent rules to implement Senate Bill 218, which authorizes the Oregon Liquor Control Commission to refuse to issue initial marijuana license based on the supply and demand of marijuana. These rules were discussed as part of the 2019 Division 25 bill and technical package. However, due to their temporary status, there is a need to make these rules permanent, separate from the technical package, which is scheduled to come before the Commission for final action in January. So with that said, I'll be able to answer any questions.
Commissioner Curran, keep on going. You're doing great.
Chair, I move to adopt OAR 845-025-1131 and 1132 and 1135 effective January 1st, 2020.
Commissioner Curran?
Yes.
Commissioner Floyd?
Yes.
Commissioner Molinas?
Yes.
Commissioner Harper?
Yes.
Commissioner Pausick?
Yes.
Commissioner Aval?
Yes.
Chair Rosenbaum?
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. I hope you guys have a joyous holiday season.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you. You too.
Contested case hearings, presentation of oral argument on exceptions to the proposed order issued by the Office of Administrative Hearings. Michael, you're up first.
Chair,
Yes.
could I just go on the record real quick? Prior to the case, I've worked with the Defendant's Counsel before. I was reached out to. A meeting was requested to discuss the case. I sought guidance from counsel, both DOJ and here. Ultimately decided it'd be best just to confine any analysis to the facts on the record, and just in general, I think that's a good policy to adhere to. I just want to make sure to make those disclosures up front.
Good. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yep.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Rosenbaum, Commissioners. I'm Michael Shine from AP&P. Joining me are Alex Tinker, seated immediately to my left, and also licensee Aaron Mitchell, managing member of Black Market Distribution, LLC. And then to his left is Rosa Cazares, who is CEO of Black Market Distribution. And they are also licensees and CEO, respectively. I think also licensees now on a number of LaModa licensees. This is a marijuana compliance action against this wholesaler licensee that was tried from April 30 to May 2nd, 2019. Before you for consideration is Administrative Law Judge Joe Allen's proposed order, which endorses staff's recommendation that this commission cancel and refuse to renew Black Market's license, and that it seize any remaining marijuana items. I'm going to present staff comments on the proposed order, then turn things over to Mr. Tinker to argue his client's exceptions to the proposed order of cancellation, after which I will ask for a chance to respond to Mr. Tinker before you retire to deliberate. We will try to confine our remarks to about 20 minutes each. I know it's getting near the lunch hour. However, there's a lot to cover in this case, so I apologize in advance.
Don't worry about that. This is more important than our lunch. We can eat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on the testimony of 17 witnesses and evidence from 107 admitted exhibits, the proposed order found 2 Category 1 violations and 4 Category 3 violations at the premises. I want to be clear that this is enough to cancel this license 4 times over. Under the penalty schedule adopted by this commission, each Cat 1 violation has a presumptive penalty of cancellation. And there were 2 here, so that's the first 2 reasons to cancel. Next, the presumptive penalty for 4 Cat 3 violations is likewise cancellation. So that's the third reason. Finally, having 3 or more violations under circumstances showing disregard for law or failure to control the premises, and here there was clearly a failure to control the premises, is an independent basis for cancellation. So as I said, enough to cancel this license 4 times over. In your deliberations, please note the particular significance of the 2 Category 1 violations that were found here. The first, violation number 6, was for failing to have 90 days of backup surveillance video when all cameras in this large marijuana-filled warehouse crashed from January 6 to February 13, 2018. The second, violation number 11, was for failing to have 90 days of backup surveillance video when all the cameras crashed again from September 20 to November 6, 2018. Now, as you know, video surveillance is one of the essential tools that the Commission relies upon to deter and track illicit activity at premises. The first failure, January 6 to February 13, 2018, is especially concerning because the evidence and stipulations at the hearing established that there were 49 boxes containing 163 pounds of marijuana at the premises on February 7, 2018, which totally lacked any of the required metric-issued unique identification or UID tags. Now, it is true that the charges based on this, not based on camera failure, but based on UID tagging and CTS tracking, were dismissed on technicalities regarding notice, which I'll discuss in a minute. But that doesn't change the fact that the evidence and stipulations at the hearing overwhelmingly established that this occurred. Further testimony established that without cameras and without tracking, the Commission could not be certain that there were not 149 boxes instead of just 49 boxes at the premises on February 6, 2018, the day before the inspection. The second total camera surveillance meltdown from September 20 to November 6, 2018 is also especially concerning because it happened despite the first having occurred, despite a violation notice based on the first and other violations issuing in April of 2018, and despite assurances from Black Market that it had fixed its problems. Now, I know from exceptions that Black Market filed that they will say of the first outage, well, you know, Rosa Cazares and Aaron Mitchell, who are life partners in addition to being business partners, had their first child on February 6, 2018. So Rosa, who was in charge of monitoring the camera alerts, could hardly be expected to keep track of what was going on at Black Market and the 24 other licensed premises that the evidence at hearing showed they held at the time. As a father and as a grandfather, of course, I understand that she could not do this under those circumstances. I think we all understand that. But the fact is that Ms. Cazares was CEO of a large group of 25 recreational marijuana licensees, and as CEO, she had responsibility to ensure that the rules were followed. She had the responsibility to ensure, at a minimum, that some other employee or employees were monitoring the cameras and other compliance issues at Black Market distribution during the period of her incapacity. She did not do that. The rule on surveillance video backup, like most Commission rules, is a rule of strict liability. That's a legal term which means that there's no requirement of intent. You don't have to intend to violate the rule. You don't have to be negligent or reckless when you violate it. The only question is, was it violated? The answer here is yes, twice in 1 year, for rather lengthy periods of time. Now, I would like to specifically address the issue of proper or improper notice. Based on a defense not raised by Black Market until the morning of the third and final day of the hearing, the proposed order dismissed a number of proposed violations allegedly for inadequate notice and with respect to one notice and one alternate, what the proposed order called unpromulgated rule language. Because staff withdrew any objection to the adverse resolution of violation number 2 on the merits, what's at issue here is the resolution of 5 violations, numbers 1, 3, 8, 9, and 10. Before even getting into the substance of these defenses, staff requests that the Commission find that Black Market waived the defenses. because they were raised so late in gross violation of this Commission's rules. OAR 845-003, 0220, and 0270, both sub 2, require a written answer to the kind of charge that was brought here. What's more, under the express language of 0703 and 4, the failure to raise a defense in your answer constitutes a waiver of that defense. That's what the rules say. Black market distribution never raised the defense of improper notice or unpromulgated rules in any answer that it filed in this case. So it waived these defenses. And let me just say that there's good reason for this rule. The Commission needs notice in order to be able to prepare a response at hearing to meet defenses. Allowing defenses to be raised on the last day of hearing, after the Commission's case had rested, encourages trial by ambush. The ALJ recognized these rules that I've just cited, but found that Commission staff had failed to give black market proper notice of them, and therefore the proposed order rejected waiver. But the ALJ was factually mistaken, so the Commission should depart from this part of the proposed order. The request for hearing form sent by the Commission with the original notice and signed by licensee's then attorney in May 2018 states, just above the attorney's signature, quote, certain charging documents require filing a written answer in addition to this hearing form. Please consult OAR, and then it cites the rules I just cited to you, 220 and 270, and many subsections of those rules. The ALJ overlooked this fact. Despite this notice, Black Market didn't file an answer for quite some time. On both March 6 and April 3, 2019, I sent emails to Mr. Tinker, counsel for Black Market, reminding him to file an answer, citing the applicable rules, and warning that failure to raise defenses constitutes a waiver of defenses. In our comments filed with this Commission, October 21, 2019, staff asked you to take judicial notice of those emails and also of Black Market's first answer, which is allowed under OAR 137-003-0615 sub 4, which has been adopted by this Commission in its rules 003-0210. Black Market has not filed any objection to that request for judicial notice. So, Black Market received triple notice of the rules requiring them to raise their defenses in an answer, and the proposed order is mistaken when it states otherwise, so you're not bound to follow it. Right after my second email, Black Market did file an answer, and then it filed an amended answer. But these answers did not raise any of the notice defenses that the ALJ used to dismiss the 5 violations in question. So by failing to comply with Commission rules and requiring rules that require them to raise their defenses in advance, Black Market waived these defenses regarding notice. Now I want to talk for a minute kind of in the alternative. Even if the Black Market had not waived these defenses, staff requests that the Commission reject the extreme approach to notice that was advocated in the proposed order. And I realize this is going kind of deep into the weeds, but it's important that we make a record in this case. We charge this case the same way the Commission has charged thousands of other cases over the years. A short and plain statement of the charges, which is an express requirement of the governing statute. These kind of charges have gone before dozens of administrative law judges over the past 40 or so years, and never before have they been found deficient. But in this case, the ALJ suddenly decided that we'd been doing it wrong all these years, and that we needed to cite all statutes and rules that might arguably be involved in the case, including definitions of terms appearing in our charges. The fact is that there are dozens or even hundreds of statutes and rules that relate to every other statute and rule in the complex area of marijuana regulation. So this is impossible. Furthermore, trying to do this makes the charges unduly complex and impossible to understand, kind of goes against the whole idea of giving good notice, as well as in violation of the statutory requirement of a short and plain statement of the charges. Finally, citing definitions is a waste of time because lawyers and licensees already know that nearly all the definitions appear in alphabetical order in one key rule, Division 025, number 1015. As an example of how true the last point is in this case, the proposed order found that violation number 1 failed to give adequate notice because it did not specifically plead the definition of inventory tracking from definition rule 1015 sub 32, even though the charge itself contains that term. But in their answer to violation number 1, Black Market argued, and I quote, that separating portions of whole harvested plant from the plant is not an, quote, inventory tracking activity, close quote, as that term is defined in OAR 1015-32, and therefore there was no violation. So they cited the definition right back to us in their defense. They clearly were on notice. There's no question Black Market and its attorneys were effectively put on notice of everything they needed to know in order to defend this case. Now, on the other side of it, what are the consequences of adopting the extreme view of notice in the proposed order? Well, they're serious. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that this has the potential to undermine all our efforts at carrying out the legislature's mandate and the federal government's requirement that we have a robust system of regulation of legal recreational marijuana. Why, just Tuesday, this week, I received a request for hearing and answer in another case raising this defense, quote, the Commission's notice does not contain reference to the particular sections of the statutes and rules involved, in that there are several other statutes and rules that are relevant and material to the Commission's decision but are not mentioned in the notice. So it's a guessing game. Several other statutes and rules that are relevant and material? How can we possibly respond to such a vague defense? The answer is that we cannot. No matter how many statutes and rules we cite in a notice, and in doing so make the charge letters incomprehensible and no longer a short and plain statement of the charges, there will always be another statute or rule that a smart and imaginative lawyer will claim was somehow involved in the case. As my colleague, lead worker in AP&P and former Multnomah County prosecutor Tom Mott observed, under the test for notice suggested by the proposed order, it is easier to plead a murder charge in criminal court than a failure to tag a marijuana plant in an administrative proceeding. Well, that's not right. Administrative proceedings are supposed to be simpler and less formal than court proceedings. The Commission should not adopt this part of the proposed order. The ALJ also suggested that CTS rules that require licensees to track marijuana, quote, pursuant to system requirements, were invalid because the system requirements of the computer program supposedly constituted what he called an unpromulgated rule. Now, the rules themselves that have this language in them, these CTS rules were promulgated. They were sent out for notice and comment, and nobody objected to them. A different section of the rules, which nobody challenged, requires use of CTS to track marijuana. Saying licensees have to do it pursuant to system requirements simply means that they should use the CTS program the way it runs. Well, of course they should. So staff requests that the Commission reject the proposed order on this point. Staff specifically requests a discussion in the final order of the reasons that the Commission is departing from the proposed order on the issues of notice. First, the APA requires this. That's the Administrative Procedures Act, so that requires it. And second, this will provide much-needed guidance to staff, to ALJs, and to licensees going forward in this area. Meanwhile, what to do with violations number 1, 3, 8, 9, and 10? Well, if this Commission finds that the notice defense was waived or that it was invalid, The normal process would be to remand to the ALJ for further findings of fact and proposed rulings on those violations. However, that would likely add 4 to 6 months to a case that has already been going since April 2018, and in light of the proposed order that already recommends license cancellation based on the other 6 violations that were found, it would add absolutely nothing to the outcome. So staff recommends that the Commission simply dismiss violations 1, 3, 8, 9, and 10 after explaining why it is not adopting the reasoning of the ALJ, and then that it proceed to cancel Black Market's license based on the 6 violations that were found by the ALJ. Well, I am now almost ready to turn things over to Mr. Tinker. However, before I do so, there's one matter that needs to be cleared up. The scope of today's arguments are governed by a statute, ORS 183-450 sub 2, which provides that aside from evidence received at the hearing, stipulations, and matters of which this Commission takes judicial notice, quote, no other factual information or evidence shall be considered in the determination of the case. No other factual information or evidence shall be considered. That's pretty clear. So I was sorry in reading the exceptions filed by very capable lawyers for Black Market to see that they relied on a lot of supposedly factual information that was not offered as evidence at the hearing, and that is therefore simply not part of what you are allowed to consider under this statute. There are 2 main categories of stuff from outside the record that they rely on. First, that attachment 1, which is a chart of violations at other licenses held by this licensee, and all the arguments revolving around their supposed record of 0.165 violations per license year, which was not evidence at this hearing. And second, their opening argument about what did or did not happen when this case was brought before you as a proposed stipulated settlement, including the opening line in their written exceptions, the presentation first given to the Commission about this matter in August 2018 was false. That's a quote from their exceptions. Commission staff, which again, I should point out, was not part of the evidence at hearing, and which could then, if it had been made evidence at the hearing, not that that would have been admitted, but if it was admitted, it could easily have been refuted. Commission staff objects to any and all argument based on these 2 points and would ask that the Commission refuse to hear it and refuse to consider the portions of Black Market's written exceptions based on these issues. However, if the Commission does permit Black Market's attorneys to argue either of these points, then we would definitely like a chance to respond on the merits. Unless there are any questions at this time, I'd be happy to turn this over to Mr. Tinker.
So you're asking us to ignore attachment 1, ignore the opening argument, and you're asking us to make a motion on that, or just, I'm a little bit confused. What are you asking us on that? We already read it.
Yeah, I understand. Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, that's a great question. I think you would consult with your counsel on procedurally, but staff would recommend that you specify in the final order what you've considered. Sometimes matters are placed before a tribunal, but it's determined that those matters are not properly before it, and then it will, the tribunal will specify in the final order that it has determined that such and such matter is not properly before it, and it didn't consider it in connection with its decision. So that would apply both to all that stuff about other licenses and to the stuff about what was discussed at the prior meeting of this commission when it was dealing with stipulated settlements. It wasn't hearing the final contested case, and that was neither of those things were ever put in evidence at the hearing.
So let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to exclude the attachment 1 in the opening argument before we even looked at it?
No, there's no basis, there's no way built into our process for staff to interfere in any way with what the licensee wishes to place before this commission, nor do I think should there be. Nor is there a reply or response other than today when we appear before you. This is our first opportunity to speak on the subject under the procedures that are set forth.
So we already read the attachment 1. We've already read the opening statement. We can't get that out of our heads. You have a response to that after counsel makes his presentation, correct? As to what the factual situation actually is compared to what was allowed as compared to what counsel is saying.
If the commission chooses at this time, it could. I mean, if it chooses to allow Mr. Tinker to argue those points, then I would absolutely like to have an opportunity to respond, and I'm ready to respond.
Chair Rosenbaum.
Go ahead, Ken.
I'd like to ask our counsel for
Well, if
clarification.
we do that, let's go into the session. Let's go into private session. Can we do that? Because this is an issue that we have to at least look at, because counsel at this point is going to make his presentation, and it's impossible for us not to listen to him without already reading what the material he gave.
Mr. Chair, if I may make 2 procedural points on this. First of all, there was extensive testimony in the hearing about the rest of the licenses and the record of compliance. All of that information in Attachment 1 is in the record. I've read the transcript several times. Next, with respect to the Commission's meeting from August of 2018, it is the quintessential sort of public record which is subject to judicial notice. You, as the Commissioners, have the right to take notice of the things that happened at your meeting when this matter was up before. Those are the 2 categories of things to which Mr. Shine is objecting. And between those that are actually in the record and those that you are allowed to take notice of, it's our position that we absolutely are allowed to argue regarding those topics.
Chair, I understand all that, but we've never allowed information that wasn't part of the ALJ proceedings to be retried here.
We have to look to counsel on that issue. I mean, if we make the decision, I'm thinking out loud. If we make the decision that counsel can't bring in that information in his presentation, he won't have a presentation in some ways.
Chair, my suggestion would be to allow him to make his argument, and then we can have that discussion in executive session.
I agree.
So I think he can go ahead and then we can make that decision.
And counsel will rebut what he says anyway. So what's the difference? That's what I'm thinking.
So
There's no way we
saying-
need to go any further on it. We need to listen to it. Counsel, do you have anything to say?
I think that's fine to go that way.
All right.
It doesn't make any sense not to. Go ahead, counsel.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, I'm Alex Tinker of Tonkintorp. I represent the licensee in this matter. That includes Black Market Distribution, LLC, and Aaron Mitchell. Ms. Rosa Casares and Mr. Mitchell are here at the table with me. They are the principals of the entire LaModa family of companies. I'd like to address some of the things that Mr. Shine said and also some of the other arguments. But first, I did bring a few pieces of printed material for members of the Commission that are exhibits directly out of the record and which I've already provided to Mr. Shine that I'll give you now.
So this is new information that we were not given previous.
These are exhibits from the official record that you have not seen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair Rosenbaum, Commissioner Raval, Commissioner Harper, Commissioner Curran, Commissioner Miletus, all of you may remember this matter from the time it first came before you back in August of 2018. The question posed to you then was whether to ratify a proposed stipulated settlement agreement. The month before that, in July, you had expressed concern that staff was being too lenient in settling cases, that it was settling too many cases. Not long before that, in May of 2018, United States Attorney Bill Williams indicated that federal law enforcement would continue to refrain from enforcing federal laws against state-licensed cannabis businesses, provided the state was policing the system effectively. He emphasized then the importance of both your role and state law enforcement's role in assuring the federal government that we did in fact have a tightly regulated market in this state. There were several proposed settlements up for ratification that day, but staff set this one aside for separate consideration, as you may remember. And staff presented the case as it was developed at that time. As you've read in our submissions, we take issue with some of the characterizations that staff provided that day. But I want to be clear that it's not our intent to impugn staff. What was being presented that day was based on the case as it was developed at that time. Since then, we've had the benefit of a 3-day hearing, 17 witnesses, 100-plus exhibits, and a complete development of the evidentiary record. At that time, you directed staff not to engage in additional settlement negotiations, and you directed staff to pursue license cancellation. I want to tell you that based on the information presented to you, that seemed like a very reasonable decision. But that information was misleading and some of it outright false. Before I turn to that, I'd like to respond to a few of the things that Mr. Schein raised in his presentation. The first, with respect to the notice defense. Licensee defended all of those charges vigorously based on the facts and the law. The notice defense that was raised late was based on an assertion by the agency that only came out at the hearing, which was that the undefined CTS system requirements were in fact rules, the violation of which could lead to license cancellation. In addition to what Mr. Schein characterized as technical or procedural issues, the ALJ agreed that the effective enforcement action there was seeking to hold licensees accountable for unwritten, unpromulgated standards that were not known or knowable to any licensee. Agency staff in fact took the position that these unwritten CTS system requirements meant that if a leaf falls off of a plant in a drying facility, a new metric package must be created. That was from T.J. Sheehy, the metric expert who testified. Counsel for the agency, staff for the agency could not point to any rules written down that made any of licensees' conduct prohibited. So I would submit to you that there are exceedingly meritorious defenses on all of those violations that the ALJ did find in favor of licensee for on procedural grounds. Next, with respect to the footage that never existed, Mr. Schein used a very specific word. He said that the licensee did not have the footage. The rule pertains to keeping footage, and our argument in the hearing and our argument if this requires appeal will be that the word keep is very important in that rule. If you have a licensee who has footage and they destroy it, that's a bad actor. That is not the regulatory partner that you want. If you have a licensee that has a server crash, a computer malfunction, and therefore the system stops making video footage, that's a different issue. There's a rule for that involves strict liability, and it's the rule about notification of outages. As we've described in our papers, licensee has always accepted responsibility for the fact that there were not immediate notifications of the 2 outages that occurred. Staff's position, and the Commission's position if it adopts the order, is that every time there is a flicker in the functionality of a system that is not reported, there is also a Category 1 violation because you're not keeping footage, you don't have an operating system, and so forth. And I won't go into too much detail on that, but I'm happy to address questions about it. Mr. Shine said that the boxes totally lacked identification. As we've described and as the pictures in your binders show, almost all of the boxes had 4-digit UID abbreviations on them, along with harvest dates. This was material that came from an affiliated farm.
Are we talking about Exhibit 4?
I believe it's tabs 3 and 4 in your binder, and I'll note that there are 2 tabs because most of the boxes did have 4-digit UID abbreviations on them, but some of the boxes didn't. They instead had a question mark or lost child, which was indicative of material that had fallen on the floor during the process of breaking down hundreds of plants over the season in this 60,000 square foot warehouse. And that licensee, rather than throwing those away or throwing them into the bin to be trimmed up with the rest, carefully set aside in separate boxes because it wanted to track every scrap and crumb of the thousands of pounds of material that it came through the warehouse that year, consistent with the rules. I'll also note that there is a proposed rule change based on the issues that we identified at the hearing with respect to CTS system requirements, because there was no rule that required the kind of tracking that staff wanted to see at that time. Now, I want to go back to the meeting in August of 2018, which, again, for the record and for purposes of assuring you, we believe you can take public notice of, and most of you were, in fact, there. Licensee and its counsel have listened to the audio of that discussion many times over. Hearing what you heard, we absolutely understand the decision that you made at that time. Based on that presentation, this case probably appeared to be the perfect opportunity for this commission to exercise its power to cancel a license, to make an example for the industry and make sure industry knew that staff would not be settling cases that involved serious violations. But the facts presented to you at that time were far different than the reality that was established at this hearing, far from the truth and the complete story. Instead, it was a summary of a summary which was based primarily on an inspector's initial impressions when he arrived at the licensee's warehouse in February of 2018. And again, it's not our intent to fault staff. They were working with the information they had at that time, but we have much more information now. Since then, the whole story has been developed with evidence over the course of a hearing. We're here today in an effort to ensure that the Commission's final decision is fully informed, consistent with the Commission and the state's policy goals, the Commission's mandate to regulate and support the industry, and most importantly, consistent with the applicable law and the facts of this case. After hearing all of the evidence at that hearing, the ALJ found for the licensee on 6 of the 10 violations that were at issue when you were considering the proposed stipulated settlement agreement. As noted, some of those were based on lack of notice, but I would submit to you that that was a threshold matter that the ALJ had to decide, but that the law and facts supported finding in favor of licensee on all of those on the merits as well. The proposed order concludes that the licensee did commit 4 of the originally charged violations, as well as 2 more that were charged later, which resulted from another server crash and failure to report a camera outage. Licensee has always accepted responsibility and continues to accept responsibility for the 2 charged violations with regard to failure to notify. As set forth in our legal papers, the remaining violations are unsupported by the law and the facts, and our view will not withstand judicial review. Ultimately, after the hearing, the ALJ found in the licensee's favor for half of the violations that were before you in the settlement conversation. I'm happy to address the legal reasoning behind our conclusion that only 2 of those violations will withstand judicial review. But first, I want to ask that the Commission consider the state's overarching policy objectives, the Commission's mandate, and the decision that you would have made back in August of 2018 had you had the benefit of a fully developed record at that time. I want to summarize some contrast between what was presented to you then and what we know now after development of the evidence through the hearing. First, you were told at that time that this matter came to the inspector's attention because the licensee was shipping product unmanifested. What we now know is that another licensee transported a single shipment without a manifest from this warehouse, that licensee has been held accountable for that in a final order, and that final order was in fact entered just 1 month after the original charges against this licensee. Staff charged this licensee with a violation for that shipment. After a hearing, the ALJ found in licensee's favor. Many of the violations at issue pertain to tracking. In August of 2018, staff told you that the licensee had 49 boxes of marijuana against the wall, that licensee's employees didn't know where it came from, didn't know how it got there, and that none of it had any UID information, and that none of it could be associated with packages in licensee's metric inventory. What we now know is that these boxes represented the very end of a very diligent tracking process, that all of the material had come from an affiliated farm, had been properly transferred into licensee's inventory, and that not one crumb or leaf came into or exited this warehouse without proper tracking. What we now know is, in fact, most of these boxes had a 4-digit UID abbreviation on them, as is common in the industry to use when dealing entirely with material that belongs to one license, because those tend to be the only unique numbers within the UID string. And that those boxes also had harvest dates on them. We also know that there was no actual attempt made to match any of those numbers up with the metric packages in the licensee's inventory, and that in fact almost all of them did correspond with packages in the licensee's inventory. And I'll note, it does appear that some of those were marked erroneously with the plant tags that were still on the plants instead of the package tags that were established when they were transferred in. That's why there were a few that didn't match up. Staff charged licensee with multiple violations for failing to track and reconcile. The ALJ found for licensee on all of them. There's another photo in your binder of the orderly piles of stalks from all of the plants that licensee had taken down. Staff charged licensee with failing to track waste, based in part on these piles of stalks. Each of those piles of stalks had a piece of paper sitting on top of it with a 4-digit UID abbreviation number, so that the licensee could perfectly reconcile the waste once the entire takedown of the harvest was complete. ALJ found for licensee on those violations. In August of 2018, you were told that the licensee failed to have a monitor to go along with its surveillance system. What we now know is that licensee's system, which allowed viewing the surveillance video from any internet-connected device, even a smartphone, was approved by staff as installed, that the licensee did in fact always have a monitor on premises, and that at least when the system was functioning, that monitor was capable of viewing video. Now, the ALJ found against licensee on that charged violation, but he did so only based on a new requirement not contained in the rule that the monitor be physically attached to the server system. This system that doesn't have a monitor physically attached to the server is the same one that OLCC approved after inspecting it when the license was issued. Next, I'd like to turn to the drying room. In August of 2018, you were told that licensee had a room that was used to dry marijuana that did not have any camera coverage. What we now know is that the small room in question was not used to dry, package, store, or label marijuana, and that the single door into that room did have camera coverage. The ALJ found for licensee on that violation. In August of 2018, you were told that the licensee had multiple unsecured exterior doors. We now know that these were all interior doors and that all of the facility's exterior doors were in fact fully compliant and had been approved as installed. The ALJ found for licensee on that alleged violation. Staff also stated that licensee's surveillance equipment was housed in an unlocked room. What we now know is that the lockable cage in which the server was housed was open at the time of inspection, but that it was never accessible or accessed by anyone who was considered an unauthorized person under the rules. The ALJ found against licensee on that violation. In sum, what was presented to you was that there was a licensee who had been shipping product unmanifested, had 49 boxes of completely unidentified marijuana in its premises that it couldn't explain. In reality, another licensee made one mistake with a shipment, corrected it before OLCC ever intervened, and those 49 boxes were the fact of diligent tracking. Instead of just throwing this stuff into the trim bin and saying it came with whatever was being trimmed, Mr. Mitchell, that wasn't good enough for him. He wanted to track every little bit of it. Finally, the cameras. You didn't hear much about the server or the cameras back in August of 2018. It may have been kind of an afterthought of the charging. This all comes from 2 server malfunctions, and all of the violations that were found against licensee in the ALJ's proposed order stem from that. We all know that computers crash. In order for you to weigh whether this was the kind of computer crash that indicates you're dealing with a bad actor, that indicates that this licensee is not a reliable partner in this highly regulated endeavor, you should understand the system that was set up, what went wrong with the system, and what the licensee knew about it. What we know now is that licensee chose to work with CannaGuard as its security and surveillance provider, and that this server malfunction occurred in the midst of CannaGuard's collapse, which impacted a number of licensees. Licensee chose to work with CannaGuard based on what they saw at every RAC meeting and every commission meeting that Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Casares attended. And they attended almost all of them in the early years. It appeared to them that CannaGuard was the best provider and that it was the most involved and intimately familiar with the rules and how to comply. They knew that that was the most important thing they had to do. Licensee selected the most expensive, sophisticated, and supposedly dependable system that was offered by CannaGuard at that time. Mr. Stokes testified at the hearing that almost no one was willing to spend that much on their surveillance systems, but that Mr. Mitchell said, "Give me whatever is the very best, because I know compliance is my first objective." Licensee selected the most robust monitoring service that CannaGuard offered at that time. That system failed the licensee. Nonetheless, licensee accepts complete responsibility for the 2 alleged violations regarding failure to notify. We agree that that does impose a strict liability standard on licensees. You have an affirmative obligation to know that your system is up all of the time. But the rules recognized that computers sometimes crash. And so a specific rule was established that does not make it a Category 1 violation if you fail to notify immediately. In fact, it doesn't expressly even make it a Category 3 violation, and we would submit that a number of these violations, which are not categorized in the rules, are actually better classified as Category 4 or 5. Back to that system. The system includes monitoring for dozens of individual cameras at a facility like this one and dozens of entry sensors and motion sensors. The system alerts CanaGuard and the licensee anytime it loses connectivity with a single camera. And you've got to think these cameras are all throughout the warehouse and they're all connected to their central hub by a wireless internet connection. Anytime there's a flicker in that connectivity, there's a notification that goes to CanaGuard and a notification that goes to the licensee. You get even more of those in areas that have satellite internet connection or that have issues with power or internet connectivity. The result of this is that licensees who subscribed to this robust monitoring system were bombarded with notifications, constant notifications, many notifications every day. And almost all of those were false alarms. When a camera loses connectivity with its server but is still recording, there's no compliance issue there. Those connectivity issues were generally self-correcting. Most of the time, CanaGuard could confirm remotely that the notifications were in fact those kinds of false alarms that didn't require any further attention. But sometimes CanaGuard couldn't make that determination remotely. In those instances, it would contact the licensee to make sure that someone would check in person to confirm whether there was a real issue. In those instances, CanaGuard's protocol was not just to send these automated text messages or emails, but to actually call the licensee, get on the phone with someone, and make sure that the matter was going to be resolved because they knew they were sending out these false alarms constantly. The testimony at the hearing was that in this instance, no one ever got a hold of the licensee, and the CanaGuard employee who called didn't leave a voicemail either, which was CanaGuard's protocol. So licensee had no reason to think that these alerts were anything more than the usual false alarms that were constantly coming in. Again, licensee accepts responsibility that this is a strict liability standard, and we've always admitted those violations.
Mr. Tanker, if I could ask,
Sure.
Mr. Chair. So initially, I got to go back a little ways because I was trying to get the chair's attention. You mentioned that when there's a flicker, that there's a notification. I just want to be clear. It went to CanaGuard and it also went to the licensee, right?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
And I'll note, this brings me to, there are actually two systems that are typically set up, and from a user perspective, they may seem like one system, but there's actually the surveillance system, which is the cameras and the recording, and then the actual security system, which is the entry sensors. In this instance, the server that keeps 90 days of high-resolution footage from 40 or so cameras, that's what had crashed. The security system was still up and functional. So Ms. Casares was still receiving an alert every time a door opened or someone entered a new room. And so the appearance from the user end is, oh, I'm still getting all of these. Everything must be humming along as usual.
Thank you.
Mr. Shine mentioned Ms. Casares' pregnancy. Again, it's a strict liability standard. It's not an excuse. But one of the things the Commission needs to evaluate is whether this licensee made good faith efforts to prevent the violation. What we submit to you is that hiring the very best, buying the very best, and subscribing to the very best monitoring at least constitutes a pretty good part of a good faith effort to prevent the violations. I'll also note that after 5 days in labor, Ms. Casares came home from the hospital the same day as this inspection occurred, and the first thing she did was call Inspector Martin Raleigh. She got home, asked her assistant, get me my computer, I need to check email, saw there was a message from him. First day home, firstborn child, making sure everything was okay with the inspector was her first priority. Now, like I said...
Counselor. Who was on duty while she was in the hospital? Since you bring that up, then I'm going to ask that question.
And the answer is that the Mr. Rodriguez Sr. and Mr. Rodriguez Jr., who were there at the warehouse, were actually on duty physically, but that Ms. Casares had not delegated monitoring those alerts to someone else. If you get to know her, and I hope that you will over the coming decades, because these are one of your largest partners with licenses in this state, Ms. Casares is an entrepreneur. she had been running so much of this family of companies hands-on, and it was really this incident that finally, if any of you have kids, you may think a kid's going to change your life a little bit, and then reality hits. And she's a small person and was twice that size during pregnancy. It was a difficult last month. Not an excuse, but I think it's relevant to considering good faith efforts. And I'll tell you that today, the Lamoda family of companies has actual human beings watching every single camera all the time to make sure.
But nobody in August when this was presented to us in August.
In August, when this was presented to you, that warehouse had been shut down voluntarily by the licensee because their decision was that if there's any question about whether this system works, we don't want to operate. Okay. Based on this server malfunction, staff charges licensee with failing to keep video and with failing to have a monitor. We've briefed in our papers that while there is a strict liability standard for notification, the use of the word keep in that rule is important, and the Commission has addressed this in another matter. The use of the word keep implies two things. One, that there is footage to keep. Right? What happened here is the server crashed and it failed to record. There was no footage to keep. And it implies some actual affirmative act on the part of the licensee. And as I said earlier, anyone who destroys evidence should not hold a license. That's not what happened here. We had a computer malfunction. As set forth in our papers, it would be legal error to find that every time the system goes out, even for 10 seconds, which is the logic in the order, there's a Category 1 violation for failing to keep footage. After hearing that presentation from staff, several of you had comments and questions which staff tried to address. They couldn't answer some of those questions because the record wasn't fully developed at that time, but it is now, and I'd like to address just a couple of them before wrapping up. One of those questions was whether the proposed fine, which I think was just over $16,000, would have had any practical impact on this licensee. I want to tell you that for over a year now, licensee has effectively been serving a voluntary suspension for its warehouse, which it shut down completely after there was a second server failure, and I'm going to address the details of that. And it also has voluntarily let 2 Tier 2 outdoor farms sit idle because this warehouse was going to be the facility where it would bring its product to dry and that it hoped would become a resource for other producers in the region who faced the challenge of getting a crop in the fall without losing it to mold. That has wreaked an exceedingly real and painful economic cost on this licensee. There was a question back in August, will this just be a slap on the wrist? Well, the defense of this has been a major endeavor, but just because Mr. Mitchell is not willing to operate if he can't be 100% sure that these systems work, he's shut 3 licenses down for over a year.
What was the original fines that we had in here?
It was, I believe it was $16,135 or a 99-day suspension.
335. 16,335 and 99-day license suspension.
Thank you, Commissioner Harper. One of your comments at that meeting was, it is, and I'm quoting, "It is clear to me that education has not made one bit of a difference to this organization." Well, I note that this wasn't a situation where there had been problems over and over again and they weren't addressed. This all arose from one incident in February of 2018, and then there was a second server failure. One of you also stated that you don't know these people. You've never met them, but you could conclude, and I quote, "overwhelmingly that they don't belong in business, and we have to make the point very clear to everybody else who's in this business." I can tell you now that as set forth in our papers and as Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Casares testified to at the hearing, the other Lamoda companies, taken as a whole, have a solid record of compliance across over 30 licenses. Even counting the 6 violations that the ALJ found against the licensee on here, that amounts to about 1 violation for every 6 license years. It's not perfect. I'm not here to tell you they're perfect. But they absolutely are a good regulatory partner. And the only Category 1 violations ever alleged against this company or family of companies are the 2 that stem from the alleged failure to keep footage when the servers crashed. I want to quickly just touch on the facts around the second outage. In the fall of 2018, there was another server failure. By then, there was a new company running the security that had been referred by Canagard. There was a server outage then. The licensee identified it. The licensee reported the outage. It was the following day that the licensee reported the outage. They were still trying to figure out what had happened. I do want to make one point about a fact that we believe the proposed order got wrong and doesn't have substantial evidence for, which is as to the date that the outage occurred. In that instance, what the IT specialist that the company has since hired and who now does proactive monitoring of every single camera system in addition to the actual physical monitoring of the feeds, which is outsourced, what he said is that the way that the crash occurred at that time caused the server to delete footage going back a few weeks. What the non-technically competent, the inspectors who both testified, no, I don't know anything about how servers work, said was, well, it looks like there's no footage from back to September, therefore it must have crashed then. What the technical experts say is that, no, it crashed at one point and that erased some of the footage. So in that instance, there was a notification. It was the next day after the licensee learned of the problem.
Let me ask you one question. I'm going to do it now or later. On the first video, which is the January 6th to February 13th, you made a distinction between the security system and the video system. Are you telling me, because I don't know, I'm asking this question, are you telling me that as long as the security system is in play and operating, that your client could not know that the video system was not working for a month and a half?
No, and thank you for the question because it's important to clarify. Again, licensee accepts that there is an affirmative obligation to constantly be monitoring and know that the system is up and that it missed on that. The reason that it missed on that is in part that while the surveillance system had stopped sending notifications because it had crashed, the security system was still up and was still sending notifications. And from the user standpoint, what that looks like is the system is still up. So I don't mean to say...
That's exactly what I just said.
Yeah, so I don't mean to say that it's an excuse, though. What I'm telling you is they could have known if they had gone and checked.
But there was a period of a month, over a month.
Yes, the server crashed on January 6th.
So nobody checked for a month because the security system was still up, so they had no reason to do so?
Correct, and because at that time, Canagard's policy was to actually get a hold of the licensee if there was anything that required checking, and the provider did not do that.
That was a period that Canagard was still employed, and essentially they were to be manning the system for them, and that's what you're paying them for.
Correct. One of the services that had been contracted was that monitoring, and Canagard's protocol at the time was if there was a notification that they could not determine was a, so to speak, false alarm, to actually get the licensee on the phone to make sure that someone checked. Canagard did not do that in this case, and that was during a period when Canagard, which I'll stick to the record, you all know, I imagine, Canagard, that was in the midst of Canagard's
Is there
collapse.
a distinction on strict liability between a flicker or a day and 52 days?
I believe does the rule refer to an outage of 30 minutes or more?
For notification.
Yeah.
Okay.
What there's a difference with strict liability in our reading of the rules is that it's no excuse that a licensee didn't know that the system was out. The licensee has an affirmative obligation to notify the Commission immediately in the event of a system outage. It is our position, and we believe the correct application of the law, every time there's a system outage, the system's not recording, the monitor can't view video. Essentially, every other requirement of a system is not currently being met if the rules are read the way that staff has asked the Commission to read them and the way that the ALJ has proposed reading them. If there's an outage, you also have all sorts of other rules that are violated.
You said on the second violation that your client notified immediately or the next day. Okay, who did he notify?
Notified OLCC licensing with a camera outage form in the ordinary way.
But the time period was September 20th through November 6th.
So this is what I was drawing the distinction with. The period during which the camera was out, based on the second time, based on the security provider's analysis and based on the company's in-house IT specialist, is that the camera failed on that date in November, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact date, and at that time destroyed some of the footage that had gone all the way back to September 20th. Contrast that with the system having actually failed on September 20th and then it not being detected until later.
Chair Rosenbaum?
Yeah.
So is there hesitation that had in fact it crashed in November, it went back and deleted material, the client contacted OLCC, that there would have not been a violation?
Yes, that if they had notified OLCC immediately instead of the next morning, that would not have been a violation for failure to notify. It's also our position that the failure to notify rule is there because you recognize that computers do sometimes crash. In the event of a crash, the licensee's duty is to fix the problem. That does not immediately give rise to a violation of every other rule that requires a functioning surveillance system. And I'll note that at the time of that second crash, there was essentially no activity in the warehouse at that time. There were still some marijuana items present there, but licensee had mostly shut it down. After that crash, licensee ceased all activity at that warehouse because having had a second server crash, they were concerned that the system wasn't good enough. And that's when they began pursuing actually having 24/7 human monitoring of every camera feed. And at that point, I think they had already begun implementing for their active locations proactive monitoring. So they've got an IT person who essentially goes around the state checking on every single site's video on a sort of rotating schedule. I want to get to the end of that August 2018 meeting, and I'll note I'm happy to discuss any of the legal points that we've put in our papers, but I thought that discussing the decision that you made and the role that you play in deciding what the appropriate consequences are here would be more helpful. Right before that vote back in August, one of you noted, and I believe it was you, Commissioner Reval, 10 mistakes, 49 boxes. It looked bad. No cameras, no door locks, 49 mysterious boxes, unmanifested shipments. The ALJ found for licensee on 6 of those alleged violations, those alleged mistakes. Most of those 49 boxes had UID numbers on them. This licensee has spent nearly 2 years and a substantial amount of money contesting these charges, not just because it wants to keep that license, but because it wants all of you to know who it is. It wants you to know that this is the kind of regulatory partner that you want in this industry. These are the kind of people who respect the rules. Across all of the licenses, this is a highly compliant operation. It's also an operation with over 150 employees. It does all of its promotion from within. Every manager and middle manager that works for any of the LaMotta companies started as a bud tender, working for minimum wage. I also want to note it's probably one of the only groups of licenses or license holding companies this big that's owned entirely by Oregonians. Every cent of revenue that they earn is reinvested in property and Oregon employees and paying taxes. It's also probably the only company of its size that's headed by a young woman of color, an immigrant, and a new mom. Now, personal circumstances aren't an excuse for failure to comply with the rules, and that's why licensee has always accepted responsibility for those 2 failures to notify of the camera outages. I'm happy to discuss any questions about our legal analysis, the facts of the case. Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Casares are also here to make sure no questions go unanswered. Based on all of this, what we would urge you to do is to decline to enter the proposed order as it's been written, and to either amend it to find licensee accountable only for those 2 violations that are supported by the law and the facts, or to direct staff to negotiate a new proposed settlement that stops short of license cancellation, because canceling this license would be inconsistent with the law, inconsistent with the facts established at the hearing, and inconsistent with the industry that this commission is trying to build.
Thank you, Counsel.
Thank you for your time.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. So, Mike, 1 through 3, 8 through 10, those are the ones that were rejected by the ALJ, and you're requesting us not to necessarily consider, or to. Well, I guess in a sense, what you're requesting is of us not to consider those.
Well, Commissioner, can I make a point?
Yeah, sorry.
I think that Attorney Schein going to have a response, so that question should be asked after he responds. What I think we should limit to right this minute is counsel's argument.
Sure. And it kind of dovetails on this. So I guess then to Alex, the question I'd have, you're Mike's saying reject 1 through 3. You guys are, the way that I read it as well is that essentially ALJ found in favor of you on those, which is a important distinction. So it just I'm just trying to wrap my head around how to kind of proceed when we go back there and what to consider. So yeah, and I guess the other question I'd have, you guys, when CannaGuard was employed from the start, correct?
Yes.
Okay. When did issues start arise, and when did the relationship sever with CannaGuard, and they went to another security provider?
Shortly after these incidents occurred. That would have been early 2018.
How early on in the because you've had CannaGuard since licensure legalization. When did issues start arising with CannaGuard? When did, I guess, the wheels start coming off the bus with them?
So I don't think there's anything about that in the record.
Okay.
And I have some personal understanding of that, but I don't know when internally it first became apparent that it was having problems or when that became visible externally. I do know that having the benefit of looking back, and this did come out at the hearing, that this was sort of right in the middle of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to go ahead.
I just want to follow up, if I may, Commissioner Miletus, on that. So you're saying CannaGuard was part of this?
CannaGuard was the primary security provider for most of Lamota's licensed locations, and I believe always was for the warehouse at issue in this case, up until this time.
All right. And page 10 of what you submitted, it calls out that, and this is the second equipment failure, system outage, October. And it says, by this time, CannaGuard was out of business and BMD was managing its own surveillance systems.
Right.
So they've been managing it throughout? Or
so by that time, CannaGuard was out of business. BMD had switched to another provider, if I recall, referred by CannaGuard. BMD was transitioning at this time to doing its own surveillance in-house. That system had been installed by an outside provider.
Okay. Just when I heard that, I thought maybe there was something.
Yeah, and I can tell you today, all of their surveillance work is done in-house. You do this enough times, you can install the system, and they've realized that they don't want to have anyone else they're depending on for the monitoring.
Is it all right?
Yeah, go.
If I may. Just one. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to get us off track. So you guys go ahead. It's somewhat related, but on a separate thing. So if this is still
We'll have another round.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'll just hold it till later then.
I didn't know if there were any comments you wanted to make relative to the definition of keep.
We've briefed this. You can't keep something that you don't have. There is nothing in evidence or any reason to think that licensee ever had some video footage that it didn't provide. The problem is that the server crashed and stopped recording, and the licensee first learned of that on February 7th. The testimony at the hearing was that everybody thought the system was up the whole time, and that Mr. Mitchell tells all of his employees that you all have a back door into those cameras that you're watching and that the DEA is watching. That's what everybody thought at the time that this happened.
Okay.
Thank you. This is related. So there's a large section referencing the Morse case, and that. So I want to make sure because I think it relates to that. I want to make sure I'm adequately understanding the what you're trying to get across by referencing that.
Yeah. So the point there is that the word keep necessarily means that this is a question not just of whether the system is functioning, but that applies to the licensee's conduct. In that case, the issue was that the servers were delivered to someone else and then the footage was lost. The point here is this isn't a case where the licensee had evidence and then did something with it or didn't store it well. The server crashed. It was all there up until the time the server crashed. And what Mr. Stokes testified at trial at the hearing was that this hard drive system was one that was a very sophisticated system that sends the data onto multiple drives with the idea that there's redundancy and that causes that if one drive fails, you still have them. What happened in this case is because and I'm not don't pretend to be an expert on servers, but that it happened in the process of that distribution and therefore lost all of that footage. And so the construction of the rule that's being advanced by staff is that if a server crashes and a hard drive actually erases or loses or makes footage that existed no longer accessible, the licensee has failed to keep footage, the licensee has committed a Category 1 violation, and license cancellation is on the table.
Chair?
Yes.
So I was here in 2018, and there was a proposed sanction. This is a question for Michael. There was a proposed sanction that we would have go into a settlement agreement. Refresh my memory on why this went back to ALJ in regards to the vote.
Because we
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Harper, members of the commission, the commission voted 5-1 against the settlement agreement, and then there was another motion made requesting that I think the motion was essentially when the hearing rights are restored to the licensee, that staff pursue cancellation of the license, and that passed 5-1. And so that was our direction, and we carried that out as.
Okay, so who was the one?
You were.
Okay. That proposal is not on our December 2019 proposed order, and we've also added 2 other issues. From what I'm hearing now is that. And we're going to deliberate back in the back room, but I'm just concerned that we changed the whole focus on what we're going to do with this business. So we have 3 things we're going to vote on, and so apparently in the year that we've set aside this, Mr. Mitchell has a new business renewal was coming up. From my understanding, he was getting another license that was renewing, and now we're going to refuse his new license. So
what's before you on black market distribution is both the cancellation and the refusal to renew just this license. It's a wholesaler license for black market distribution. It does not apply to the existing licenses or renewals of those existing licenses, and that's commission precedent. So, so that's the only issue right here before you. Now, the kind of chart that was put forward that shows, all these violations, or few violations, actually, to be quite candid, few violations at other LaMotta locations, is the kind of thing licensing takes into account when it's issuing a new license. That's the primary relevance of that. I'm not saying that it's not appropriate to consider it in mitigation also, as Mr. Tinker has argued. But usually when we look beyond and we look at other licenses, we're talking about a licensing decision. I hope that answers your question.
Because on the third issue, it says we're going to seize or destroy any marijuana items.
Yes.
From what I'm hearing, they said they stopped working a year ago.
Well, that's a voluntary choice.
Voluntarily had a choice. So why would we assume that there's marijuana items at this place?
Well, we know that there were 49 boxes that were actually what's happened to them at the request of the licensee. They wanted to be able to shut down their cameras. Actually, those boxes are being held
They're
in Medford.
Still there for 14 months.
Well, they're black markets marijuana being held in the Medford regional office. That's subject to this destruction order if you accept the ALJ's recommendation.
This is an unusual case. It's not going to come back in front of us in this form, but it's so important for this commission to understand the process. So the process for me is critical. I was the one who said, we don't know these people. I was the one who said, based on the fact of what was in front of me, we should take their license. Now, I did that on the basis of saying the shipping was a serious violation. Now you're telling me that another licensee did the shipping and they had nothing to do with it. I didn't know anything about it. That's what you're telling me.
I do want to be clear. This was a shipment from this licensee's facility to the Hush facility.
But your argument is that there was another licensee.
And the
You're
final
sitting
order.
Here today saying to me, I looked at this and said 39 boxes, that's a serious offense. I actually thought it was probably 339 boxes. But you're telling me that that 39 boxes were there at the end of a diligent tracking process. And so that I have to say maybe I was wrong on that. Okay, so let me go further.
Yes,
there was no actual attempt to match the items. You're telling me there was. So you're telling me I'm wrong in where I came from. Failure to track the waste. I thought that was serious. You're telling me no, it's not serious because you did track the waste. You had I thought there was a totally inadequate monitoring system. You're telling me no. The dry marijuana in the storage, you're telling me you took care of that. And the multiple unsecured exterior doors, which I thought was a serious matter, you're saying that's just not true. The interior doors were there and that I had complete control over it. Okay. I have an open mind on this. I'm going to go back there and make a decision, and this is serious. I want to ask your client one question. You're telling us we were wrong, or you're telling me that I was wrong on everything that I assumed because I thought you were a bad actor, and now you're telling me you're not really. But you were willing to close your place down, pay a $16,000 fine. Why? Because all this stuff was wrong, and we didn't have it right. Why did you do that?
I didn't trust my system anymore, and we wanted to create our own IT department. I didn't want to rely on someone else monitoring my system and my cameras after what had happened. So I have a lot of other businesses, and anything that Canagard did, we just wanted to change the system over so that mistake just didn't happen again.
Am I wrong in assuming that it was easier to pay the $16,000 fine than tell us all that you were wrong? You just accepted the $16,000 fine, and then you would have gone back into your business again?
that would have been a lot easier for me, but you guys would have maybe had a negative outlook on our company.
In your opinion, why didn't you defend yourself when this came out?
We did. We didn't.
Well, why wasn't this information given?
And I'll step in here. First of all, there was different counsel involved at that time. The process for submitting stipulated settlements to the commission does not provide for licensee or their representative to present facts. And so the only way to present information to you as the system works is through the hearing. So a hearing was requested at the time, looking at things rationally, as is often the case for people in similar circumstances. There's a chance to fight, to spend maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars and years and risk all of those violations sticking. Or there's accept responsibility even for some things that you don't think you're guilty for, because that's the rational business decision. That's the decision that was made.
Sure. I'd like to hear Michael's response.
Mr. Shines, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Mr. Tinker has an eloquent style, and one of his rhetorical flourishes is what we know now. Unfortunately, when he says that, what follows is a small selection of one side of the evidence that was presented. And I'm going to be very specific on each of these. First off, what we know now about the 49 boxes of untracked, untagged marijuana. Well, the report that was before the inspector's report, Exhibit A1, page 9, which is evidence in this, said when the inspector was discussing the packages with Nelson, who was the employee on the scene, he stated that anything they could not associate with a UID tag or package was in those boxes on the wall. I asked what he meant, and he related they got this dumped on them after Christmas 2017, as the two employees were here, would not show them anything about their system of storage, and they disappeared after Christmas. He further said that these are, meaning those boxes, the question marks. We can't associate them with any tag numbers. They could not produce any tag information on any of the 148 pounds, which was stipulated to actually be 163 pounds of marijuana contained in the boxes. So that's certainly what we knew when staff brought this to you in 2017 and the basis for answering the questions that were put to us. But what did the hearing do? Well, at the hearing, I asked Mr. Nelson about these same things, and he either, for some of them, didn't remember, for others agreed that that's what he said at the time. In addition, Inspector Rowley testified under oath that that's what he was told at the time. And he put some of this into quotes, and he testified when he put something in quotes in his report, it means that's the exact language that was given to him by the employee on the scene. Now let's take a look at those boxes. The evidence was even admitted by a very good law firm that 20 of the 49 boxes had no number of any kind anywhere. They were written lost child or question mark. Then there's another bunch of boxes that have these handwritten partial numbers, 3 digits, 4 digits. Well, T.J. Sheehy testified that you need all 26 digits to track marijuana. For example, every single licensee in the state who gets a UID tag gets UID tag 0001. So there are thousands of 0001, just like there are many 0246 and many 0320. And this is a wholesale licensee, so they handle marijuana products from a number of different licensees, so they're likely to have multiple of those things. Now, were there UID tags in the boxes or on the boxes or in the product there? It's been represented that there was UID numbers, which isn't accurate because a UID number is 26 digits, and that was the evidence at the hearing. But there were no tags. A UID tag is a specific tag with a tracking device that can be read by an inspector with his reader, and it's got the numbers embossed right into it by metric, and you're required to order it. And we keep track in metric of which tags are ordered by the licensees. And without that actual tag, we cannot, and this was T.J. Sheehy's testimony at the hearing, reliably track marijuana. We can guess, but let's look at what was actually there at the premises. Well, here's some examples of problems. Using the 3-digit number 309, which appears on box 28, there have been 6 packages in Black Market's inventory ending with this sequence. 2 of these items are designated as whole harvested plants. Likewise, the 3-digit number 328, which appears on boxes 49 and 20, there have been 5 packages in their inventory ending with this sequence. Further following this number 328 that appears on 2 boxes, there's a notation on box 49, handwritten, that says DD 328-11-7. Does that help us track it? Well, an inspector would have no basis to understand DD, although he might assume it applies to a user-generated strain name. However, none of the marijuana items in Black Market's inventory ending 328 had a strain name DD or with the initials DD. Adding the assumption that 11-7 is a date that's useful doesn't help match the item because none of the 5 dates in Black Market CTS corresponded to that date. That's the level of sloppy tracking, if you call it tracking. We don't call it tracking. That was on those boxes. So let's not kid ourselves about what the evidence showed was there. You know, another example of lack of transparency, look at package 338. That was broken into 8 separate boxes by the licensee. They should have tagged each box as a new package. They didn't. They admitted they didn't track that by breaking it out, putting a new tag on it, and putting that into CTS. The aggregate weight on those 8 boxes per the stipulated exhibits was 39.5 kilograms on 2/7/18, which adjusted for box weight and converted to pounds equals 65.8 pounds. Black Market CTS showed that there were only, 15.5 pounds of product associated with a tag ending 338. Again, wildly inaccurate. And this goes on. I'm not going to go through each of the boxes, but that's what the evidence showed about the boxes there. Now let's talk more about what we know. It was truthfully stated to you. I want to be clear about staff. We don't come here. We try to stick to exactly what we know. It was asked, because these were in U-Haul boxes several times, were these ready for shipment? And Jesse Sweet got up here and said, no, we have no indication that they were actually shipped. We think they were just put in U-Haul boxes because that's what was there. That's not what we're talking about with shipment. However, as T.J. Sheehy did testify, or Inspector Rowley testified, once it's not tracked in the system, for all practical purposes, it's diverted. We don't know where it's going or when it could go, especially when there's no cameras to look. With respect to there was one manifest violation which has been discussed, and that was the violation. Product was shipped from Black Market to Hush A&M, and then returned from Hush A&M back to Black Market. It went out, I believe it was October 25, within a day or two of 2017. It came back, I believe it was October 30, 2017. Neither shipment had a manifest, and that's not disputed. So here's how it came about. We charged no manifest against both Black Market and against Hush. We should have charged Hush with the shipment back on the 30th, but I think we charged them with both directions. So they got an order against them finding a violation for shipping it one way and the other without a manifest. Mr. Tinker is correct that another licensee was found responsible for that. Nonetheless, that charge was not reached on the merits by the ALJ, but was thrown out for a different reason, which goes back to notice, the defense on notice. So the ALJ never got to the merits of that. We argued that, based on our interpretation of the rules, we could nonetheless find a violation for this reason against Black Market. Their employee greeted an employee from Hush on October 25th, 2017, and entered them into the Black Market metric system and gave them rights under the Black Market metric system to create a manifest for a shipment out of Black Market's inventory to Hush. We argued that by doing that, they made this Hush employee their employee. Again, we don't know what the ALJ would have ruled because he never reached the issue. He just said, well, you're relying on some rule definitions, so there wasn't enough notice, and he threw it out. But there was a good basis for that charge. The monitor, it was claimed that it was approved by staff as installed, the security system. The testimony was that only a small part of the premises was approved at the time, and there was no testimony directly as to whether that monitor system was approved. But what the charge was not that they were in violation all the way back to the time they were approved. The charge was that they were in violation of not having a monitor from the end of December until February 7 when the inspector went in. That has nothing to do with original approval. What the employee, Nelson, told the inspector and what was verified in the evidence was that the employee said, we never had a monitor attached to that system in the whole time we'd been here, and we started working in December. So that's why we charged it that way. There was no monitor attached to the system at the time, but yes, they found a monitor after, we said, well, why not the inspector said attach a laptop, but they still could not produce video. And the ALJ very sensibly ruled that that is a violation. The rule requires that, you have a monitor that is effective for the purpose of being able to check whether there's surveillance. Now, the other thing I want to mention is this idea of cameras and a flicker. We don't charge people with Cat 1s for flickers in their internet. But flickers in the internet or in the power is very important here because there were several power failure notifications given to this licensee in December and then again in January 6, right before it went down. And that's the reason everything crashed and they failed to keep. They lost. They had surveillance and they lost it when everything crashed. Among the questions I ask is, did you consider putting a generator in? Because you're in a small town, maybe you should have a backup generator. Well, no. There are lots of ways to make sure you don't have this problem. But we're not going to charge for a flicker. This is not a case of a flicker. This is a case of twice over several months, or at least numerous weeks, not having surveillance backup and not knowing that they had it. Now, I can tell everybody kind of wants lunch here, but there was so much said, and there's so much to say, but I'll try to hit just a few more high points. Do we charge every rule? No. You'll see, for example, in the camera one, we charged the camera rule and we charged 3 alternates. Frankly, we could have proved 4 violations there, but we charge it that way because we try to be fair to the licensee. The licensee received multiple alerts on her phone, and so she couldn't tell when the cameras were down. Well, the testimony was that she elected the total package of alerts. Some licensees only elect to receive the key alerts. CannaGuard, I think there was some confusion. CannaGuard does not monitor for Black Market. CannaGuard notifies its customer if the camera goes down, but it's the responsibility of the customer, who's our licensee, to notify the commission. And as was pointed out, Ms. Cazares chose to retain that responsibility even when she knew she was incapacitated to carry it out properly. Now, I have to correct a serious misstatement in the evidence about what happened January 6th with notification to Black Market about that first outage. It's been stated that, well, there was just maybe a phone call and no voicemail. But that's not what the evidence shows. What the evidence was, and I read again this morning, is that there was an email to the email address that the testimony showed is the one that was provided by LaModa and that was monitored by Rosa Cazares, or supposed to be. And there was a phone call to Rosa Cazares' cell phone, which was the phone number provided on the date of the crash. And then, when they didn't hear anything for 5 days, when Canagard didn't hear anything back for 5 days, then they called back and they didn't leave a voicemail. That's what they're referring to with didn't leave a voicemail. So email, phone call, wait 5 days, call again, still nothing. The whole idea of, it's really a fancy lawyer's argument that was rejected by the ALJ about the meaning of the word keep. And the ALJ recognizes if you were to interpret keep in the way suggested by Mr. Tinker, then the rule would be useless because it would only apply when there's deliberate throwing out of information. The fact is there was both not creating and and getting rid of, in the sense that when it crashed, there had been created surveillance of the premises, and then when it crashed, it was corrupted and fell apart. But we already argued this to the ALJ, and he interpreted the rule as strict liability, which is what it is. And what it says is a licensee must keep surveillance recordings, except for off-site backup recordings, for a minimum of 90 calendar days for licenses issued or renewed after August 31, 2016, which theirs was. A licensee must do this. That's all. Not an intent, not negligence, nothing else. Now, I want to say something here, kind of to wrap up. Let me see if I need to cover this. It says respond in big letters. Oh, yeah, the IT specialist for the last outage, where the question is whether it was September 20 that it went out or October 24th, and the representation has been made that only the inspectors who don't know anything about IT thought it was 9/20, but the guy who really knows something, who's Tyler Montgomery, who's their IT specialist, later testified that it was actually October 24th that it went out. Well, it doesn't really matter. It went out October 24th through November 6th. They had an outage. They didn't have 90 days. That's the violation. But I want to address it because what really happened is that the inspectors asked Tyler Montgomery when they went out there in December 2018 what happened, and he told them the cameras went out 9/20. And that's what they put in their report. So it's not just, inspectors who don't know tech stuff. They asked the tech guy at Black Market, and that's what he told them, and they wrote it down. Now, he changed his testimony a little for direct examination, but then on cross-examination, he admitted he really didn't know whether they went out on October 24th or November 20th. And the ALJ weighed all this evidence and found, based on the fact that they could only produce a still photo showing 9/20 camera surveillance and then nothing after, that it went out on 9/20, and that's the finding that the ALJ made that you should adopt. So my final point is a policy point. And, there was a lot of discussion, I think, of when this originally came around about whether these are the kind of people you want to be in partnership with or not, and whether they were bad or good or anything. And I hear that, and it kind of washes over me, and I understand that that's a concern for you. But that's not the issue. The issue before you is whether to cancel one of, and the evidence did not show 33 licenses. The evidence at hearing showed 25 licenses, but whatever. The issue before you is whether to cancel one out of those 25 licenses. And it's the one that has 2 Cat 1 violations and 4 Cat 3 violations after the toughest defense that could possibly be put up. And that's what the ALJ has proposed. And, you know, it's not a question about whether these are or are not good people. And I do not cast aspersions on Aaron Mitchell or Rosa Cazares. We are in partnership with them and will be on an ongoing basis. But with respect to this premises, they blew it. And hopefully they've learned. Sounds like they've learned. But still, the fact is, this premises had a lot of untagged, untracked marijuana floating around. It had a camera crash and then another camera crash that went on for over a month each time that they didn't even know about. And we can't allow that. I mean, if we're going to treat licensees equally and we have this situation, we have to accept the recommendation of the ALJ and cancel this license. Thank you very much.
If I may respond briefly.
Curtis, we're going to give you.
As you can imagine, Mr. Scheinen.
Hold on. I don't think you get that right.
Well, I think. I think.
No, I'm
counsel,
not. Unless I'm
do we
told
have the
yes.
do we have the right to grant him a response?
I think it's within your discretion.
Well, unless there's an objection, we
I
should.
object.
Okay. Anybody else objects? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you can imagine, Mr. Schein and I could go back and forth with each other for weeks, and we want to get this wrapped. I must respond directly to one thing that Mr. Schein said. I told you there was an email and a text message and a phone call. I did not misrepresent anything to you about the way that the camera's outage was notified, and it's important that you understand that I am telling the truth based on what's in the record to the best of my ability. This is not just about you finding the facts in the law like the ALJ did. You have discretion in determining the penalty. That is very much a matter of policy and a matter of whether you've got licensees that are a risk of noncompliance in the future. And all of these things are relevant to that. What Mr. Rodriguez testified to at the hearing about the boxes and the marking was that the situation was dumped on them. The grower who had farmed most of this crop and transferred it into the warehouse and oversaw the initial processing had quit. New employees had come in. What he said at hearing was that the question marks were the boxes marked with question marks and with lost child. Mr. Sheehy and I, regarding those metric numbers, went back and forth quite a bit at the hearing. There were a few that had the same 3-digit extension, but as Mr. Sheehy and I went over, once you add in the harvest date that was marked on the box, you could identify which one it was referring to. There was no effort during the inspection to check those numbers and see whether they matched up with what was in inventory. All of that product was in the inventory. It was in the system. There's no allegation that anything was improperly tracked coming into or going out of. And that's the purpose of this tracking system, is to make sure we know who has and who gets what. All of that was tracked perfectly. With respect to the monitor, the premises, there was testimony from the inspector that he hadn't been the one who inspected the entire premises because of timing of multiple applications, if I recall. But at that time, there was no monitor attached to the server. And Mr. Schein has just suggested that having it physically attached is actually part of the rule. That's not in the rule. We live in a Wi-Fi world. If you want to have a monitor that's capable of viewing it inside a locked room that apparently, according to the staff's position, can never be unlocked, that may be practical. Finally,
why couldn't they pull it up, though?
They couldn't pull it up because the server had crashed. There was no video to view at the time. The whole system had crashed. Finally, there's language in the statute and the rules regarding mitigation, right? We obviously disagree about which violations actually occurred. I don't think there's much disagreement about the actual facts. What actually happened is pretty clear. But the question you've got to then ask yourselves, even if you find that certain violations occur, is are there mitigating circumstances? And you have broad discretion to consider mitigating circumstances. One called out in the statute is good faith efforts to prevent the violation. Now, necessarily, good faith efforts to prevent the violation means something less of doing things perfectly so that the violation doesn't occur, because you can't prevent something that doesn't not occur. The question for you, even if you believe that all of these violations occurred, is then what is the appropriate penalty? Did this licensee make good efforts to prevent the violations? And is this licensee a risk of future noncompliance? Mr. Schein is right that Ms. Casares didn't delegate the monitoring. She should have. Lesson learned. But was there a good faith effort to prevent the violations? I'll remind you that this was 2017 outdoor harvest. This was the first year that this commission had even licensed outdoor producers in this brand new experiment of a regulatory system. A lot of people lost a lot of crops because they didn't have a warehouse to dry the material in. This was the first year that someone was trying to operate a warehouse to transfer in whole harvested plant packages to dry them safely. I'm not here to tell you that everything was perfect. I'm here to tell you that they made diligent efforts to track everything, and that the version of the story that caused you apparently to reject the settlement was that you had a reckless licensee without locked doors, with a camera system that didn't work, and 170 pounds of completely untracked marijuana. What you really had was an unfortunate confluence of a server crash, a young CEO pregnant with her first child, and a new system being put into play. We're talking about an agricultural industry here.
I get it, but if I would just say contain your comments just directly to that, if you could, please.
Yeah. And
this is just a rebuttal to what was his short rebuttal.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Commissioner Kern.
Thank you.
The commissioners will now go into chambers for deliberations on contested cases pursuant to ORS 192.690 sub 1. Commission is back in session. Commissioner Harper.
Mine here?
Yeah, it's right here.
Okay.
And in relation to the contested case?
In the matter of a marijuana wholesale license held by Black Market Distribution, LLC, doing business as Black Market Distribution, I move to continue deliberations to a future commission meeting.
Commissioner Kern?
Yes.
Commissioner Floyd?
Yes.
Commissioner Harper?
Yes.
Commissioner Molinas?
Yes.
Commissioner Palcic?
Yes.
Commissioner Raval?
No.
Chair Rosenbaum?
Yes. Motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission.
Anybody got an agenda here? Oh,
yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. Contested cases on compliance. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Chair
You're going to have
Rosenbaum,
an easy time after that.
I was thinking you can go one of two ways. Glad to hear it's going to be the easy way. For the record, I'm Andy Chiller with APMP, and I'm here to present the proposed stipulated settlements for commission ratification. Today we have 8 alcohol settlements and 16 marijuana settlements for your consideration. I'm happy to take any questions about the settlements.
No questions. Let's do the alcohol violation stipulations first.
Chair?
Yes.
I move to ratify the 8 stipulated settlement agreements as proposed by staff.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kern?
Yes.
Commissioner Floyd?
Yes.
Commissioner Harper?
Yes.
Commissioner Molinas?
Yes.
Commissioner Palcic?
Yes.
Commissioner Raval?
Yes.
Chair Rosenbaum?
Yes. Marijuana violations, do I have a motion, please?
Chair, I move to ratify the 16 stipulated settlement agreements as proposed by staff.
Commissioner Curran?
Yes.
Commissioner Floyd?
Yes.
Commissioner Harper?
Yes.
Commissioner Molinas?
Yes.
Commissioner Palcic?
Yes.
Commissioner Raval?
Yes.
Chair Rosenbaum?
Yes. Thank you very much. This is the first time since I've been on this commission that we did that, so the staff is obviously in the right direction as far as the commission is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners.
You
Have a
did
happy
great
holiday.
job.
Thank you.
Happy holiday.
Nice
Merry
boxes
Christmas.
over there, too.
Yeah, just came on.
I can't guarantee it's always going to be that way. Steve, you got anything?
I don't have anything that I have to do. It's been a long day. I think we're getting ready for the legislative session, as you know. So you've heard about the issues already, so more to come, and I think we'll find our feet the 1st of January. So thanks for your work today. Appreciate it.
Any final words?
I would just like to say to the commission, happy holidays and thank you so much for an incredible 2019. Again, we made history, and I look forward to more historic work in 2020.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned.